Chapter 2979. The strength of his fingertips was a little strong. The uncontrollable strength of his fingertips was even trembling. Wei Bai slowly blinked her eyes before she reacted and revealed a happy smile. "Monk, you have a reaction." Ning Chen didn't say anything. His thin lips were pursed, and a trace of red faintly appeared in his dark eyes. The seductress under him didn't seem to know what consequences she would cause. She was still unforgiving and proud. "I'm so beautiful. Even a stone would be warm." "You're moved, right?" She didn't have the self-awareness of flirting with him at all. It was as if she didn't intend to take responsibility for whatever bad thing she did. She just viciously felt that she was very powerful. She even struggled for a while, and her fingertips gently rubbed against his fingers. That careless action didn't feel serious at all. It was just to make him crazy. Ning Chen lowered his eyelashes slightly. He slowly lowered his head. His breath was hot, and his eyes were terrifyingly cold. The girl under him had a stunning appearance, and her eyes were so clear that one could see the bottom. He could even see the excitement in her eyes. She seduced his pride. His thin lips gently pressed against her lips. His breath was hot. His kiss was cold. He was moved. What surged out of his feelings was a dark possessiveness. He pinched his fingers together and heard her gasp as he wished. It hurt. The gloominess in Ning Chen's eyes spread a trace of evil heat. This was the darkness that belonged to the depths of his heart that had been tainted. The girl's fragrance was like a kind of breath that tempted him to enter hell. His soft lips were only lightly pressed against hers. This was a restrained kiss that didn't go further. The girl beneath him seemed to be in disbelief. Then, she tentatively licked him lightly. His body trembled. The moment before everything went out of control. Wei Bai only felt the strength on her wrist loosen, and the young man on top of her disappeared. Only the sun shone in the empty meditation room. The scriptures scattered on the ground. She sat up quietly, reached out to touch her lips, and sighed. "Tongzi, the monk is blooming. Ding, the system has been blocked." Ning Chen stepped into the devil-subduing tower and killed a few great demons. Then, he sat down in the dark devil-subduing tower and closed his eyes to recite the scriptures. In the darkness, countless demons whispered to each other. "Monk, is there a crack in your mental state? Is he going to become a demon? He, who was it that caused your heart to crack like this? You sure have a good heart. You still haven't dealt with such a huge heart demon. I see it. It's the love test. Which family's little sister is this? Send her to us and let us see how delicious she must be to move your heart. I've been waiting for this day for so long. Little bald donkey, you're suffering from a heart demon. You're hopeless." Ning Chen slowly opened his eyes. Between his eyebrows, there was a bright red cinnabar. He looked into the darkness. There was a trace of uncontrollable madness in his clear eyes. Then, he raised his hand, and the prayer beads floated up from his beautiful fingertips. Countless prayer beads scattered, breaking through the demon's defenses. Countless evil creatures in the darkness screamed. Mournful screams rang out. Finally, the demon-subduing tower regained its silence. The young man's face paled. He lifted his finger and found that his power was faintly emitting a dark aura. He never used too much power. Because this power was to purify and suppress his own body. He looked at his finger indifferently and found the hell in his heart. Without the suppression of too much power. It had begun to spread. The black shadow was huge and extended from under his feet. Slash. Chapter 2980. It kept growing up. Finally, it turned into a terrifying giant shadow, shrouding him. The black shadow let out a silent, twisted laugh. Ning Chen was expressionless. Until the black shadow slowly became smaller. The black shadow condensed into a graceful and beautiful body. A young girl stepped out of the black shadow. Her features were delicate, her eyes were clear, and her every move had a seductive charm. The young girl slowly squatted down, reaching out to touch his face. She moved closer to him silently. Ning Chen did not push her away, but stared at her for a long time. Only then did he reach out and shatter the illusion that came from his heart. Then, the young man closed his eyes and meditated again. He did not know, how long could he last. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 85. Wei Wei Bai heard the favorability notification and immediately said, the side quest needs to be faster, or else it won't be completed before 100. The system immediately said, remember that nest of bandits? Because you killed their gatekeeper, they were angry and started killing people everywhere. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up, good, they are so heartless, if I don't get rid of them, I'll be letting my conscience down. The system flipped through the information, they have a lot of people, if we catch all of them, there will be about 105 of them. Wei Wei Bai immediately counted with her fingers, I already have 13 lives in my hands, I just need to pick 87 more flowers to complete the side quest. The host's math was really good. The system silently stopped its action of taking out the calculator. Wei Wei Bai thought about it seriously, then asked, where's Monk Ning? This provocation ignited the monk's anger. He definitely would not dare to face her for a while. There was no helping it, he was too pure. He was too shy. Sigh, Man Si was so troublesome. The system said, I can't see what he's doing, he entered the Tower of Demon Subduing. Wei Wei Bai looked like an experienced driver, he's not angry, so he went to exercise. For example, killing a few big demons. When he was tired, he could enter sage mode and become cold-hearted again. He was a man. She was clear. Wei Wei Bai said, he won't be coming out for a while. Let's go pick some flowers. After saying that, she immediately turned small and ran out happily. It would be easier for him to escape if he turned small. The youth in the demon subduing tower suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was deep. The boundary line he left at the door of the meditation room was touched. This was what Ben could have done. Because he left in a hurry, afraid that something would happen to her. Therefore, he left a line so that no one could get close to the meditation room. She could go out. However, going out would definitely cause ripples in the barrier. Ning Chen looked at the door expressionlessly. Where to? Looking for him. He lowered his eyes and looked at his fingertips. He could no longer suppress the black gas. He couldn't suppress the longing in his heart. He suddenly sighed softly. Perhaps it was because he wanted to fulfill his desires and obtain her, just as this thought came to him. He immediately stopped. He knew that it was the darkness in his heart that had started to take over that caused him to waver. Ning Chen pursed his lips. If he was drowned by his desires, he would degenerate into a demon. At that time, he was not the same as he was now. Demons were unbridled and reckless. He would destroy her. Ning Chen hesitated for a moment and crushed another Buddha bead. There were only 3 drops of blood in his heart. It was not long after he was born and entered the temple. The old abbot took 3 drops of blood from his Buddha bones that were not stained with darkness. There would be no more after it was used up. Because his Buddha bones were stained with dark aura, he couldn't use them. // Chapter 2981. The Buddhist beads shattered. The power of the heart's blood purified the darkness on the Buddhist bone again. The gate of hell slowly closed again. Ningchen saw that the black shadow had completely disappeared. He waved his hand, and the Buddhist beads turned into a string again and hung on his wrist. He slowly stepped out. The tower of exorcism was empty. Only the chains that locked the big demon hung silently in the darkness. Ningchen returned to the door of the meditation room and looked at the empty room. He narrowed his eyes and went to the spiritual pool again. He didn't see that small figure. He began to slowly, carefully, step by step throughout the temple. No, where did it go? Ningchen looked at the door of the temple. Did it run out? Wei Bai washed her hands and felt that they couldn't be washed clean, so she asked the system for strong soap. After washing until her fingers were wrinkled, she said with satisfaction, "These bandits are not human. Are they not embarrassed to be so black? Their vital essence was as black as coal. None of them were good people." The system took out an abacus and counted. 13 plus 51, a total of 64. There are still 36 people left. Wei Bai wiped her hands clean and ran in the direction of the temple. There's no other way. There's not enough time. The monk will be suspicious if he can't find me. I'll find a chance to kill the remaining bandits in the future. She didn't know why the side quest asked her to kill 100 people. It seemed that the side quest had been mining since. The side quest was even more heartless. If she could get the side quest's vital essence. The vital essence was probably even blacker than the bandits. Wei Bai had just arrived at the door of the meditation room when the system said, "The male lead is back." She stopped in her tracks and quickly adjusted her state of mind. She didn't expect the monk to come back so soon. She wasn't afraid that the fact that she killed people would be exposed. She was afraid that she would be discovered before she killed 100 people. Because once she was discovered, it wouldn't be easy to kill in the future. Even if they were evil people. Monk Ning, that old fogey, would probably keep a close eye on her. She wouldn't have a chance to do it. If the side quest couldn't be completed, she didn't dare to farm favorability. Without a deeper favorability, Monk Ning wouldn't let her go. That would be a deadlock. It was hard to say when the time would suddenly flow. As soon as Wei Bai stepped into the room, she saw Ningchen standing beside the table. Under her snow-white fingertips were scattered scriptures. He was slowly putting away the books that had fallen into disarray. Ningchen heard the footsteps and was about to turn around. Wei Bai had already rushed over. She hugged him with both hands and tried to rub against his back. "Monk, you're back. Have you thought it through and decided to marry me?" All the questions were summed up in this one sentence. Ningchen seemed to be at a loss. Get married. These two words were so unfamiliar to him that it was as if he had never heard of them before. Wei Bai suddenly frowned. After releasing him, she turned around and sat down on the table. At the same time, he messed up the scriptures that he had tidied up. She reached out and tapped his chest. "Monk, you won't go back on your words, right? You did that to me and you still want to pretend that nothing happened? You're simply not human." Her expression was solemn and filled with righteous indignation. It was as if he had done something heinous. Ningchen only felt a warmth in his chest. His breathing paused and he immediately took a few steps back. He wanted to explain something. But when he thought of something, his eyelashes drooped slightly and he fell silent again. Wei Bai smiled and walked forward. She pressed her hands on his shoulders and exhaled seductively. "Monk, am I delicious?" Chapter 2982. That's all there is to it. Ningchen felt that the desire that he had suppressed using his heart's blood was about to be easily pried open by her again. He reached out and touched the back of her hand, wanting to avoid it. The moment his fingertips touched the girl's skin, he paused. A trace of doubt flashed through his indifferent eyes. There was another aura faintly discernible in the girl's pleasant floral fragrance. It was the aura of a human. The aura of death. He lowered his eyes, and the eyes under his eyelashes were terrifyingly dark. Ning Chen pursed his lips, but the girl had already leaned over and kissed him softly. He was stunned and immediately reached out to hold her wrist. His other hand pressed down on her shoulder, preventing her from continuing to kiss him. He whispered, "Don't do this." Wei Wei Bai muttered in dissatisfaction, "You can kiss me, can't I kiss you for a long time?" This made the youth speechless. It was indeed a sentence that he couldn't refute. He lowered his eyes and remained silent for a long time before suddenly holding her hand. He led her to the front of the futon and pressed her to sit down. Then he also sat cross-legged on the other futon. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. What? Don't try to change the topic. You kissed me, so you have to take responsibility. Ning Chen pinched the prayer beads and silently looked up at her for a while before sighing softly. The age of humans and demons is different. I will die sooner or later. He was like a magnanimous elder, his eyes cold and clean, his words gentle. What can you do by putting your feelings on me? In less than 100 years, I will be a pile of bones. You will have nothing except sorrow and weak strength. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Suddenly, she pursed her lips and glared at him unhappily. Then she snorted, "Are you trying to avoid your responsibility? If you don't want to marry me, just say it. Why do you have to talk so much?" She crossed her arms and said coldly, "Only you know how to reason. I know how to too. Monk, even the gods can't control feelings. Even if it's 100 years, I will love you for a year, a day, and an hour." Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled. He felt that his heart was on the verge of collapse. It wasn't that he wanted to convince her. He might as well convince himself. Wei Wei Bai was still unforgiving. You kissed her and didn't admit it. You're not a good baldy either. You're a typical playboy. You're full of excuses and you don't intend to take responsibility for anything. Ning Chen felt that he was about to be convinced. He felt that if he did not marry her, he would be a bastard. He glanced sideways and said calmly, "Where did you go just now?" Wei Wei Bai glanced at him and said lazily, "She's looking for you." Ning Chen narrowed his eyes and asked casually, "In the temple?" Wei Wei Bai smiled. "I couldn't find you in the temple, and there were many places I couldn't go, so I went outside the temple to relax." After saying that, her eyes turned cold. "What's wrong? I'm already restricted from going out. You don't have the authority to restrict where I go now." Ning Chen sounded a little confused. Now? He thought she would say that he never had the right to restrict her from going out. Bai Weiwei raised her voice with a bit of pride, "My husband has the power to restrict whether I go out or not, do you want it?" Ning Chen, then he silently turned to the side and did not look at her. He even took out the wooden fish and started to knock. Wei Wei Bai immediately moved the futon and smiled mischievously. "Monk, did it feel good to kiss me? You can't forget that feeling, right?" Ning Chen, Wei Wei Bai was about to continue. But she heard him say faintly, "Don't mention it." Wei Wei Bai, ? Ning Chen sighed. "Every time I want to knock this, it's like a nightmare." Wei Wei Bai. Nightmare? Ning Chen nodded slowly and knocked on the wooden fish. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "I have a nightmare about returning to the secular world." Wei Wei Bai blinked in confusion. What's a nightmare about returning to the secular world? Was it a nightmare because he wanted to marry her after returning to the secular world? Ning Chen pursed his lips. Because after returning to the secular world, I can't recite scriptures anymore. By Wei Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Com. Download the read the full text. 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 Save button below to record the full text. Chapter 2983. Chanting Little Bald Donkey. A high-level model of destined to be alone. Wei Wei Bai wanted to crack open his skull, then take the scriptures and stuff them in. She wanted to light a fire and let him live a hot life with the scriptures. Chanting scriptures. If she wanted to seduce him in the future, she could stick the scriptures on her body and he would probably pounce on her. The system saw that the host was gloomy. It felt like a demon was surrounding her. It touched its arm and felt a little cold. It immediately comforted the host. The other party is just saying one thing and means another. Your favorability is so high, the little vixen Jingwen can't compare to you. You don't believe in your own ability, but you don't believe in your beauty. Wei Wei Bai touched her face and finally felt relieved. Although I know you're just coaxing me, it still feels good to hear it. Tong, you've become so gentle recently. The system was cutting off the thread and changing a few details of the clothes. He looked like a good wife and mother. We rely on each other. There are so many planes. If I'm not gentle to you, who should I be gentle to? Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that Tong, who she had never met before, was so handsome that her legs went weak. Even if they met in the end and he was really ugly, she would not dislike him. Wei Wei Bai's mood finally turned better. She also felt that the bald donkey was not so annoying. However, Ning Chen still continued to knock on the wooden fish. At an angle where no one could see, his eyes were cold and the dark aura in them slowly condensed. He realized something. But he slowly suppressed this thought. He did not even dare to think about it. He had always been truthful, but he did not dare to ask why she was stained with that aura. Maybe it was just an accident. Ning Chen slowly lowered his eyes, but he knew that this excuse was extremely ridiculous. Suddenly, the girl behind him leaned over again. She rubbed his neck softly and said coquettishly, "Monk, I'm hungry." Ning Chen's ink-like eyes wavered. He was silent for a while before he finally sighed helplessly. "What do you want to eat?" Wei Wei Bai was about to say something. But she heard him say slowly, "Except for me." Wei Wei Bai burst out laughing. "Who would want to eat you now? I was planning to treat you as a long-term food reserve. When there's nothing to eat in the future, I'll lick you a few times to satisfy my hunger." Monk Ning, who originally wanted to shut her up, didn't expect that there was always someone better than him. He had been overly affectionate to begin with. But she made it sound even more outrageous. Monk Ning's ears warmed up, and the gloominess in his heart dissipated. He couldn't bear to think about it too deeply, and he couldn't wait to escape from this obvious question. Therefore, he stopped knocking on the wooden fish and slowly stood up. The girl was still floating behind him with a smile on her face. "Monk, you're not chanting anymore." Ning Chen's footsteps didn't hesitate. His tone was indifferent. "You're not hungry. I'm going to pick some spirit herbs for you and boil them to make some pastries." She was hungry. It wasn't because of the lack of spiritual energy. Instead, it was the desire for good food. Cultivators shouldn't have all kinds of complicated desires. Desire was liking. She liked to eat. She didn't seem like a lotus spirit, but more like a human. In fact, he shouldn't indulge her desire for good food. It wasn't good for the path of cultivation. But he heard the girl happily say softly, "Monk, you're the best. I like you so much." This mouth of hers. Ning Chen silently lowered his eyes. Forget it, he'll correct her later. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 86. / T. Chapter 2984. Wei Wei Bai was curled up on the bed. Her small face was soft. Her eyelashes were lowered quietly as she slept soundly. Ning Chen sat by the bed and looked at her expressionlessly. After a long time, he gently raised his fingertips. It gently fell between her eyebrows. Then he took his finger back again. No. It was clean. There was no aura of death on his fair fingertips. But the aura was always there. He was born with a Buddha bone, and the Buddha bone would instinctively absorb the dark aura. And the aura on her body was absorbed by his Buddha bone. It took him a while to react. It was the aura of death. This aura was too familiar. It was the dark residue produced after the demon absorbed the essence of humans. No matter where this essence was used. Under the rules of the heavenly Tao, every life would be counted to her. No matter how these auras were counted to her. They would be locked by the heavenly Tao. A golden light appeared on Ning Chen's finger. It was the power extracted from the Buddha bone, and it had the function of searching. His fingertips gently fell on her lips. Her lips were soft and slightly moist. After his fingertips touched them, they trembled. The expressionless youth lowered his eyes slightly, and a blush began to appear on his fair face. Because if the demon ate humans, then the dark aura on her lips would be the most abundant. Ning Chen took a deep breath and suppressed the feeling of surging emotions in his heart. He began to slowly rub his lips against hers. Then he was about to pull back. The girl seemed to have noticed something. She frowned slightly and licked her lower lip with the tip of her tongue. However, she accidentally licked his fair fingertips. Ning Chen was stunned and immediately pulled his finger back at lightning speed. The girl's aura remained on his fingertips, slightly moist. He lowered his head, not daring to hold his fingers, nor did he dare to pick them up to look. It was not easy to wait until the slight moist feeling on his finger dried up. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and pick up his finger. No, clean. No eating humans. Ning Chen looked up and stared at her quietly. She just licked her lips, making them more delicate and beautiful, and fell into a deep sleep again. He used the mind-cleansing spell, so she should not wake up easily. Ning Chen's beautiful eyes were slightly lowered. He was silent for a moment before he exhaled softly. It was fine as long as he didn't eat people. But fairies didn't just gain power through eating humans. There was also the absorption of essence energy. Every demon had a different way of absorbing essence energy. Some of them relied on the matters between men and women. This was the path that most female demonesses would choose. Because this was the most thorough, simplest, and happiest way. Thinking of this, Ning Chen's eyes turned cold. A ruthless emotion almost broke through the shackles of the Buddha's heart. It was like a ferocious beast, lurking in his eyes and rolling in darkness. He looked at Wei Wei Bai solemnly. If he used that method to obtain essence qi, in that case, there was no way to determine which part of her body would have more dark aura. Because the dark aura was in her body. If he wanted to investigate, he could only. Ning Chen's face was cold and silent. In the same way. If he couldn't detect her aura from the outside, then the remnant of the darkness must be in her body. Without any hesitation, Ning Chen placed his finger on her collarbone. No. He placed it on her chest, her abdomen. Nothing. His expression grew darker and darker. The fine cinnabar between her eyebrows faintly glowed with a golden light. This was the sign of her surging anger and her strength. He touched her arm. No. His face was a little pale, and his eyes were incomparably cold. His fingers were even trembling slightly. His outer skin was not stained with the dark aura. Chapter 2985. So he didn't eat her directly. Could it be that, Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes? She didn't do it on purpose, but the system reminded her. Monk Ning was taking advantage of her. Oh my God, the old monk is blossoming. He even knows how to take advantage of others. If she didn't get up quickly, she would be sorry for Monk Ning's sudden enlightenment. Wei Bai immediately turned her head with sparkling eyes, only to see Ning Chen's fingers on her arm. Then she looked at herself. Not a single piece of clothing was missing. The monk's clothes were not missing either. Could it be that touching her arm was taking advantage of her? The system's standards for taking advantage of Monk Ning were too lax. She pursed her lips. Just as she was about to force the monk to take advantage of her arm, she found Ning Chen's eyes deep and cold. Under his cold eyes, his thin lips were tightly pursed. His lips were slightly pale. This didn't look like he was taking advantage of her. It was more like he was touching the pork to see if it was fat enough to be slaughtered. Seeing that she had woken up, Ning Chen's hand that was touching her arm paused. His fingertips even used more force, leaving a red mark on her arm. Wei Bai frowned. His eyelashes fluttered slightly, and he slowly moved his fingers away. Then he said softly, "You're awake." Wei Bai immediately showed a happy smile, then turned over and lay on the side of the bed. Her long hair fell over her shoulders. The charming seductress narrowed her eyes slightly. "Monk, what's wrong with you? Are you secretly touching me?" Ning Chen's eyes fell on her face. She was a seductive girl, but she had extremely pure eyes. Extremely gorgeous. She was also extremely pure. Seductive, but for a moment. He slowly looked away and said lightly, "I accidentally touched it. If you don't want to sleep, continue listening to my chanting." Wei Bai immediately turned over with a smile, reached out and twirled her hair. Her voice was soft. "Monk, you really don't mean what you say. If you want to touch me, I'm happy. You don't have to be sneaky." This sentence was said casually. The listener was counting the prayer beads between her fingers, but in an instant, she almost broke them. Normally, he would listen to overly sweet words. At this moment, it became the most piercing knife to the bone under his doubts. She grew up in a spiritual pond, and the temple was solemn and dignified. No one dared to be too licentious. When it became a spirit, it would follow by his side. What he taught her was cultivation, meditation, and chanting scriptures. No one had ever taught her these words. When did she become so seductive? Wei Bai intended to continue flirting. After all, it wasn't easy for honest monk to appear. He didn't dare to do anything to honest monk who made him blush. He was even more tolerant than the old tortoise in the back mountain. He had a stone-like personality and couldn't say anything for a long time. She had spent a lot of effort to provoke his temperament. All sorts of flirtatious and sweet words came out. Otherwise, if she silently guarded him for 100 years, she might not even get a trace of his affection. She smiled and said softly, "Did I hit the nail on the head? Why aren't you saying anything? You don't have to be so polite to me." Suddenly, a hand gently stroked the back of her neck, as if it was holding a cat, and the fingers suddenly exerted force. She was stunned. Her waist was already held by the other party's other hand. Then, she turned over and lay flat on the bed. Ning Chen was already sitting on the bed. The young man's hair had grown a lot during this period of time. The strands of hair were scattered under his eyes, bringing about a trace of gloominess. He lowered his head, and his thin red lips were extremely tight. It was as if he was suppressing something. He finally asked in a low voice, "Don't have to be polite. Are you like this to everyone? / next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. If you liked fast." Chapter 2986. She went out to seduce others. Was she also using such flowery words? When he was not around, she disappeared. Was she really like those indecent female demons who went out to seduce human men and then used those damned methods, absorbing their essence? Were these sweet nothings prepared for those times as well? Wei Bai instinctively felt that it was dangerous. Why did this little bald donkey seem to be here to denounce her? Her analysis of him was similar. Monk Ning was not the kind of person who would get angry for no reason. After all, his emotional fluctuations were very solid. They were not flowing at all. Anger was an intense emotional fluctuation, and it wasn't something that could happen for no reason. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Wei Bai's mind, but on the surface, she still looked confused. She was like an innocent child who could not see that he was angry at all. She gently held his face with both hands, raised her head obediently, and rubbed her cheek against his chin. She was as lazy as a cat. The girl narrowed her eyes and said softly, "Monk, why are you angry?" "I'm only like this to you. Who else?" After saying that, she could not help but laugh. "Are you jealous? You're the only monk in this temple who catches my eye. How can there be others? No one else is as handsome as you." These words were even more frivolous. But it was her usual tone. Her image had always been top-notch. Even if she knew that this tone would anger the other party, she would continue to maintain it. Ning Chen's face was a little pale. The dark aura began to corrode the purity of his Buddhist heart. He had already suppressed a lot of inner demons. At this moment, these thoughts almost squeezed his sense of reason. He casually threw the Buddhist prayer beads aside. They floated in the air, emitting a faint white light. They seemed to have sensed the unstable mood of their master. Wei Bai also instinctively felt that Monk Ning's mood was a little strange. It seemed that his Buddhist heart was unstable. Could it be that the dark hell had come out to cause trouble again? Just as she thought about this, she saw a huge black shadow appear behind Ning Qin. The black shadow was like a thick night, spreading from the bed. The bed was immediately covered by this shadow. When the shadow appeared, the meditation room was dark. It was so dark that it was too strange. She couldn't even see Ning Chen's face clearly. She could only feel his presence on her body through his fingers, his aura, and his heavy breathing. Wei Bai stretched out her hand, and the power of purification appeared. He was swallowed up by the black shadow. Compared to this boundless and terrifying darkness, this purifying power was nothing more than the light of a firefly. It was insignificant. The dark hell in Ning Chen's heart was too terrifying. Wei Bai was about to reach out and touch Ning Chen, intending to let him control himself. In the end, his outstretched fingers were entangled by the dark chains. Wei Bai blinked in confusion. Ha! The next moment, her body was imprisoned. Huge black chains wrapped around her body. She immediately shouted angrily, "Monk, you've lost control of your power. Quickly control it." Her purifying power was completely useless in the face of such a huge malicious desire. He could only rely on Monk Ning's Buddhist light to suppress it. However, Ning Chen seemed to be controlled by the darkness. His face, which was hidden in the shadows, no longer looked holy. On the contrary, it seemed abnormally evil. He seemed to have just reacted, and a strange expression appeared on his cold face. There was endless desire hidden in his dark eyes. His voice became hoarse. Didn't you tell me not to be polite? By Weiwei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com/fast download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Calm fast, comma. Chapter 2987. Has the honest man suddenly turned bad? She's not used to this feeling. Weiwei Bai immediately shows a cute smile. Why are you being so polite? With our relationship, it's too polite to talk about being polite. She uses a tongue twister while using her fingers laboriously to release a purifying power, intending to corrode the chains. Monk Ning looks wrong from the inside out. At this time, it's better not to provoke him. But just as her fingers move, Ning Qin slowly reaches out and pinches her wrist. The pain makes her gasp uncontrollably, and a trace of moisture appears in her eyes. Her voice softens. Monk, let go of me. Her voice is too soft and sweet, like a spoiled child. Ning Chen's fingers pauses, but he doesn't let go. Instead, he leans down and does what he wanted to do the most when the desire in his heart first arose. He lowers his eyelashes slightly, covers his thin lips, and kisses her. This kiss is not gentle. It's a kind of paranoid possessiveness, even rough. In the endless darkness, the girl lies under him. The youth who has never made a mistake and restrained himself reveals his ferocious antennae for the first time. He pinches her wrist and does something to her that he would not do normally. Weiwei Bai only thinks, is this a stone blooming? No, this stone is not only blooming, this stone is about to take off its clothes. Of course, it doesn't take off its clothes in the end. Just when she thinks that it's going to be cooked. The youth on top of her is suddenly stunned. His face was cold and paranoid just now, but now it's incomparably pale. As if he can't believe what he did. His eyes are a little confused. On his pale face, only the cinnabar between his eyebrows and the red on his thin lips are unusually conspicuous. He slowly raises his hand, and the Buddha beads suddenly fall. They come to her side. Then the youth's voice trembles. The encirclement formed by these beads can protect you. Don't come out. Then he releases her wrist and leaves the bed. When Weiwei Bai gets up, she sees that Ning Qin has already walked out. And the darkness also follows his footsteps bit by bit, firmly following him out. In the end, the meditation room returns to its original state. The dark hell just now. It has disappeared. Weiwei Bai sat on the bed and looked at the prayer beads floating around her. She extended her finger and tapped on one of the prayer beads. However, the prayer beads did not move. Instead, they emitted a gentle force, preventing her from touching them. It was like its owner, hard to get close to. Weiwei Bai rested her face on her hands and pondered calmly for a moment. What's wrong with this stone, monk? Did you lose control of your emotions? After thinking for a long time. Apart from going out to kill people recently, there was nothing else that could make Monk Ning suspicious. But every time he went out to harvest the spiritual essence, she was certain that Monk Ning was not around. Although the system couldn't detect what the target was doing right now, it didn't know what to do. In fact, he couldn't even sense its location from a distance. However, if it was nearby, the system would definitely be able to sense it. Moreover, Monk Ning shouldn't have reacted this way when she killed someone. Instead, he would use an alms bowl to lock her up and recite scriptures day and night to purify her mind. Instead of looking like this, jealous. What was there to be jealous of? Could it be that there was an unknown handsome admirer around her? If Monk Ning knew, did he think that she had an affair with that unknown admirer? Wei Wei Bai, I have an admirer. The system flipped through the information. Yes, there are a few toad spirits on the side of the road who like you very much. They think that you look good. Wei Wei Bai, // Chapter 2988. After Monk Ning lost control once, he shut himself in the demon-subduing tower again. Wei Wei Bai went to see him, but found that the door was closed, and there was a barrier around the tower. A demon couldn't step over it. She shouted at Monk Ning a few times in front of the door, but there was no response. At first, Wei Wei Bai thought that Monk Ning would only be in seclusion for a day or two. She didn't pay much attention to it. Until half a month passed. He was actually guarding the pagoda to the death. It seemed that the outbreak of the inner demon gave Ning Qin a terrible sense of crisis. Wei Wei Bai speculated that Ning Qin probably wouldn't forgive her for molesting him. Therefore, he had to shut himself in until his 6 senses were pure and the 4 elements were empty before he dared to step out of the tower. During this period of time, he might be able to complete the side mission completely. Bai Weiwei pondered as she continued to jump around outside the tower. During this period of time, she shouted outside the tower every day. After all, she had to let Ning Qin know that she missed him, so he shouldn't think that the 4 elements were empty. Wei Wei Bai held a loudspeaker made of lotus leaves and shouted, "Monk Ning, don't think about running away. I might have your little bald donkey in my stomach. When are you going to run away? Get down here and take responsibility, you scumbag who runs away after eating." That was how she shouted. She wanted the 4 elements to be empty and the 6 senses to be pure. It was too late. She was his inner demon, and she was determined to rely on him. Don't try to shake her off. Continue to live your peaceful life. Wei Wei Bai continued to shout, "Monk Ning, you've already broken your precepts by doing that to me. You still have the face to stay in the temple? If you're a man, come out and return to the secular world and marry me." There was already a circle of monks around her. Most of them were eminent monks of Buddhism. After all, the monks in Wanyuan Temple were the elites of the most powerful Buddhist cultivation. They watched as a demon spouted such filthy words to the leader of Buddhism every day. Their hands itched to beat her to death. But every time they wanted to do it, they would look at those Buddhist beads. The life pearl of the abbot was floating around her. Was there really something going on? Monk Ning told her to learn from the old turtle. In the end, he turned into a turtle first. Wei Wei Bai had been shouting outside the pagoda for half a month, and his reputation had spread far and wide. He looked at the unwavering favorability. Wei Wei Bai rubbed his chin and nodded in satisfaction. And the favorability didn't drop at all. This means that Monk Ning's 6 roots are still not clean. I'm still his inner demon. That was why she could complete the side mission without worry. She had a feeling that Monk Ning would not deny his feelings after coming out of seclusion this time. If he could deny it. Her favorable impression of him wasn't that strong. Furthermore, even after being in seclusion for so long, he still couldn't get rid of this inner demon. At that time, he could only give up and obediently increase his favorability. Wei Wei Bai calculated the strategy clearly. Then, she finally left the pagoda and walked out of the temple. Ning Chen's natal Buddha beads did not follow. Because Ning Chen was in the pagoda, the Buddha beads wouldn't follow him. The system had already detected the bandit base, and most of the remaining bandits had returned. If she collected all of them, she would be able to collect 100 beads. Wei Wei Bai thought that it was better to complete this annoying task before Monk Ning left the pagoda. And when she left the protection circle of the Buddha beads and walked out of the temple, the young man sitting in the demon-subduing tower suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was deep. He slowly looked at the door and pursed his thin lips. Left? Ning Chen looked at the door silently for a long time. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2989. Finally, he got up and walked out step by step. The black shadow behind him also followed his footsteps and spread out. It was like a moving hell, hiding in his shadow, waiting to devour people. Wei Bai took out a handkerchief to wipe her fingers, then listened to the system take out a calculator and calculate. 99, still missing one. She raised her eyebrows. Is there anyone else here? Those innocent victims who were locked in the dungeon didn't count. She was talking about robbers. The system took out its binoculars and looked around. Yes, there's one more, in the northeast corner. Wei Bai immediately walked forward with light steps. She smiled and walked through the hall full of corpses as if she was taking a stroll. The corpses were all dried up. They were scattered all over the place like specimens. The beautiful and perfect girl didn't even lower her head, like the corpses beside her feet. They were just stones that she didn't need to care about. She walked to the northeast corner. But she heard a woman scream. Wei Bai immediately kicked open the door and saw a bed and a robber who was plotting against a woman. Wei Bai felt that this robber was simply polluting her eyes. She moved her finger, although it was just a weak little demon. It was more than enough to deal with an ordinary person. A chair smashed into the robber's back. The robber let out a scream and fell down. The woman who was almost insulted also got up from the bed in horror, then she glanced at Wei Bai. Wei Bai smiled, let's go. The woman immediately looked at her gratefully, then immediately ran out. The robber got up with difficulty and saw the person standing at the door. The girl's graceful and slender figure was bathed in the light, her face was bright, her eyes were sparkling, and her snow-white skin was beautiful and flawless. The robber was stunned for a moment. He moved his lips and said, "Fairy." Wei Bai walked in front of him, took out a handkerchief and wiped her hands in disgust, then she took off the dark essence on his head through the handkerchief. The bandit immediately turned into a shriveled corpse. Wei Bai said disdainfully, "Sigh, being praised by an ugly person makes me feel cheap." After she finished speaking, she heard the sound of a side mission notification. Ding, congratulations to the host for completing the side mission. Wei Bai felt that the disfigurement knife on her head was finally gone. But in the next second. But she heard it. It was the sound of thunder. This was a familiar feeling. She immediately walked out of the house. Sure enough, she saw dark clouds gathering above the roof. The lightning was like a dragon, faintly discernible in the dark clouds, exceptionally horrifying. Wei Bai narrows her eyes. This is not the world of immortal cultivation. Why would there be signs of tribulation? The system suddenly frowned. You violated the Heavenly Tao's rules. The greatest rule of this plane was the Heavenly Tao. Wei Bai was now a stowaway. Her body was the key to her entry, but it was destroyed by the side task. He was forced to use the lotus as her body. If it was any other day, they would have no problem keeping a low profile. After all, the Heavenly Tao couldn't just observe whether the ants on the ground had the same color. But she didn't expect that the side mission would be waiting here. 100 lives. No matter if it was a bad life or a good life. As a stowaway, once they violated the law of human life, they would be involved in a sin debt. And once they were burdened with a sin debt, in the eyes of the Heavenly Tao, this ant would be like a light bulb that would shine. She didn't expect that a random mission could randomly give out such a danger. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 2990. Wei Wei Bai was confused. How did I get into trouble with this thing? Other people don't get struck to death even after killing a bunch of people. Was she that lucky? She killed 100 bad guys and was targeted by the heavenly axiom. The heavenly axiom was too idle. The system coughed guiltily. Maybe it's the sinister purpose of the side quest, which is to put you in danger. I said that the side quest is not a good thing. Wei Wei Bai said, the side quest is so vicious. Why don't we take out some life points and hire an assassin to kill it? The side quest was to dig a hole. It was definitely unprepared. It was not safe to let it dig a hole, so it was better to let it go and never come back. The system hesitated, then said, an assassin is quite expensive, more than 100,000 life points. Wei Wei Bai said, forget it, how can a kind person like me do that? Is there anywhere to hide from this lightning strike? The system said, why don't you go back to the house and hide? Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What it meant was that there was no place to hide. Such a big lightning dragon, the house was directly torn apart by the lightning, so there was no place to hide. Although she knew it was useless, Wei Wei Bai still returned to the house. Out of sight, out of mind. If she was struck to death, her soul would be stuck here. When the time came, she could use the female ghost to harass Monk Ning, and his favorability would still increase. After all, Monk Ning was so skilled, he could not even see a female ghost. Bai Weiwei found joy in the midst of bitterness and thought about the future. But she heard the system's reminder, Monk, no, the male lead is here. Weiwei Bai raised her eyebrows. Why did he suddenly come out of the tower and find her here? Oh right, she had one of his life pearls on her. If he deliberately looked for it, of course he could locate her. The heavenly axiom wanted to strike her to death. Maybe I can get some sympathy points. Bai Weiwei had just adjusted her state and was about to show a delicate and pitiful expression, a pear blossom with tears, a bit of strength in fear, stubbornness in strength, and a fragile beauty. The door suddenly opened. The youth's fingers rested on the door. He was wearing a white monk's robe, and the patterns on his robe were faintly glowing. His gaze was deep as it landed on her body. It happened so fast that Weiwei Bai's expression froze for a moment. Then, she immediately omitted all other emotions, leaving only a bewildered expression. Ning Qin walked all the way. They had seen many corpses. The corpses all had their essence sucked out. When he saw that the corpses were all wearing clothes, he didn't feel disgusted. It was just that, she didn't rely on that method to absorb spiritual essence to relax. Then, he saw the lightning strike of the heavenly Tao appear. It had been a long time since something like this had happened. Normally, such a punishment would only occur when there was an evil and uncontrollable demon. Or, if an eminent monk were to enter the demonic path, it would also cause such a phenomenon. Ning Qin lowered his eyes in silence. This was directed at the little lotus fairy. How many people had she eaten? That's why heaven's punishment was triggered. This punishment caused her soul to scatter and her body to be destroyed. The young lady in the room had a confused look on her face, as if she didn't know what kind of trouble she had caused. Ning Qin sighed faintly and slowly walked over. Just as he was about to say something, he saw that not far behind her, a corpse was upside down. That corpse was disheveled. He looked at it silently for a while, then slowly raised his eyes. His pitch-black eyes became deep and icy cold. The young lady had already pounced over. She hugged his neck with both hands, almost hiding in his body. Her face was pressed against his neck, and her breathing was disorderly. Chapter 2991. Monk, I'm scared. Ning Qin stood there quietly. Finally, the first bolt of lightning split open the roof, and the black clouds accumulated and pressed down. The surroundings were shrouded in violent darkness. The girl in his arms trembled even more. Ning Chen half closed his eyes. Then, he finally reached out and hugged her waist, whispering, "How did you get into such a big trouble?" Wei Bai didn't hear the sound of the favorability decreasing. She was very relieved and rubbed against him. "I was wrong, monk. I won't do it again." This kind of casual way of apologizing. It was not sincere at all. The girl's voice even had a trace of lazy sweetness. It was as if she thought that if she apologized, there would be idiots who would always forgive her and be willing to be controlled by her. Ning Chen saw the faint appearance of the lightning dragon in the sky, but it didn't fall again. He hugged her and slowly walked out. When he walked out of the door, he coldly turned back and looked at the disheveled corpse. From his back, a black shadow flowed out and wrapped around the corpse. The corpse immediately turned into ashes and was blown away by the wind. The young man looked on indifferently. The girl in his arms was still cute and soft as she muttered, "Monk, why is the sky suddenly dark? Those lightning bolts look so scary." Ning Chen quietly lowered his eyes. After a long time, he sighed. "That's heaven's punishment. Don't leave me. I was born with a Buddha's bone and I'm very blessed. Heaven's punishment won't fall around me." The girl softly rubbed against him and said with a smile, "Monk, you're so powerful." Ning Chen's footsteps paused. His eyes were cold, but his thin red lips were slightly curved, revealing a trace of self-deprecating smile. "Really?" The girl innocently nodded. "Of course, I like you the most." Ning Chen's self-deprecating smile deepened. He finally said indifferently, "As a demon, your charm skill is really perfect." Did she say the same thing to the other man just now? After absorbing so many people's essence. She wanted to have fun, so she played with the disheveled man and sucked him dry. Otherwise, how could she explain it? There was another man in the room who was barely dressed. Wei Bai felt that there was something wrong with Monk Ning's tone. She thought about it again. Apart from absorbing too many people's spiritual essence, she had attracted divine punishment. She shouldn't have done anything out of line. Or, the corpse in the room was not properly dressed and caused a misunderstanding. There couldn't be such a stupid misunderstanding, right? It was obvious that the corpse was an ugly monster. In Monk Ning's eyes, she was not low enough to make a move on such a person. So, what was he angry about? Recently, Monk Ning was really hard to understand. Sure enough, once the old sea man opened the door of love, he would be as pretentious as a Chinibu. Ning Chen carried Wei Bai all the way, and the lightning dragons also followed him all the way. They gradually dispersed. The sky was clear again. Wei Bai was still in awe of the abilities of the proud son of heaven. Then, he was carried into the demon-subduing tower by Ning Chen. The door closed by itself. She was practically carried in by him all the way. By the time she realized what Monk Ning was doing, Ning Chen expressionlessly took out a pair of leg cuffs and handcuffed her. She sat on the ground and looked up at him blankly. Ning Chen stood in front of her and looked at her coldly. His eyes were cold and his eyebrows were enchanting. "Let's start." His voice was calm, but there was an unusually dangerous hoarseness in it. Wei Bai was confused. "Start what?" The young man in front of her stared at her blank eyes and suddenly chuckled. Then he bent down and gently lifted her chin with his fingers. There was a trace of cold laughter in his voice. "Don't you like me the most? You can start seducing me." At this point, he paused. Then he slowly said, "Just like how you seduce those men." By Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com download. Read the full text. 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 Chapter 2992. She wasn't stunned on purpose, but Monk Ning suddenly became abnormal. She was a little surprised. It was rare to find an honest target, but he also went crazy. Wei Wei Bai blinked and looked at him innocently. A weak mist appeared in her eyes. Monk, what's wrong with you? Did you lose control again? She didn't seem to understand his words. She didn't even understand that he could hurt her now. Ning Chen looked up coldly, his delicate snow-white jaw slightly tightened. He stared at her for a long time with an expressionless face, then said softly, "Do you know? Only demons who have committed heinous crimes can trigger heavenly punishment. As a demon, your strength is weak, so you need a lot of essence to cultivate." "I understand." She looked at him blankly, a trace of panic finally appearing in her clear eyes. She immediately explained, "Monk, I didn't want their essence. They were bad people, I couldn't stand them, so I killed them. Look at me, I don't have the smell of essence on me." The system said that it was impossible for essence to have a smell when it was thrown into the box. She felt that she didn't have the smell of death on her. So Wei Wei Bai stretched out her slender fingers and gently touched his face. Like a soft plant, she slowly wrapped her arms around his neck. Her whole body leaned against him. The girl's fragrant and slightly moist breath made Ning Chen's breath stop. She leaned against him and said slowly, "Monk, I didn't kill people for cultivation. Those were bad people, I didn't do anything wrong." The girl's voice was soft and sweet, like the most poisonous candy. It made people willing to swallow it. It even tasted delicious. Ning Chen's eyes were dark and gloomy. He looked at her silently, as if he was waiting for something. Wei Wei Bai just hugged him and looked at him anxiously. After a moment of silence, Ning Chen said indifferently, "Is that it?" Wei Wei Bai felt that her explanation was okay. After all, if she really absorbed so many human lives, how could she be so weak? Monk was an expert in this field, it was impossible for him not to see how much strength she had. She couldn't possibly be blinded by a toad and be stubborn to the end and insist on framing her. So she turned her eyes, pursed her lips, and shook her head blankly. "What else do you want?" "Monk, I only killed a few bad guys, why are you so angry?" At this point, her eyes lit up and a trace of anger appeared on her face. "That heavenly punishment has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything and it came by itself. You can't blame me for this." She was used to being a jerk in this plane. His tone was so childish. If the words were too wise and clear, Monk Ning would probably suspect that she was possessed by some kind of demon. So after she finished speaking, she gently rubbed his cheek, as innocent as a child. "Monk, you have to hug me properly. I can't stand the heavenly punishment." Ning Chen lowered his eyes, his expression as cold as snow. He raised his hand and gently placed it on her wrist. Then, he forcefully pinched her wrist. She immediately frowned in pain and was about to complain. Slowly but firmly, he pressed her to the ground. He looked down expressionlessly. His beautiful fingers pinched her wrist to the cold and hard ground. When the youth did all this, he seemed too elegant and slow. There was not a trace of rashness under impulse. It was like when he was chanting scriptures or holding a Dharma assembly. The rhythm was slow and steady. When Wei Wei Bai realized something, the youth had already bent down and kissed her. She flinched, wanting to avoid this kiss that was too strong. Chapter 2993. However, she saw the young man slowly raise his face. His eyes were still cold, but there were dangerous blood vessels hidden in the depths of his eyes. The cold and holy young man's clothes were a little messy at this moment. His thin lips were moist, and his thick and exquisite eyelashes were drooping lightly. There was a hint of evil in his beauty. Do you like to pretend to be obedient when you are having fun with others? What was divine punishment? He knew best. She had never been pure and innocent. She was not even a good demon. Instead, she was vicious, full of filth, and ruthless. She had at least tens of thousands of lives in her hands, or she had made some vicious mistakes that could not be tolerated by the heavens. That was why she had attracted this punishment. Ning Chen stretched out his slender fingers and gently hooked her clothes. His voice was low and steady. Your body is a lotus, and you grew up in the spirit pool. You shouldn't have made such a big mistake. Besides, it's impossible for you to make such a big mistake with tens of thousands of lives by my side, and there's no time. The voice of reason. In the empty demon-subduing tower. The beautiful and abstinent young man slowly stretched out his pale fingers and did something forbidden. Dark shadows gradually enveloped the tower. In the past, there were countless great demons locked here. But now, it was filled with a dark hell that spread out from the young man's heart. His breath was a little uncontrollably heavy, but his tone was still indifferent. So it's a foreign great demon that entered the weak lotus. Soul possession or life seizing. It was a word unique to this plane. If a great demon was able to use its power to attach its remaining soul to another creature before it died, then the great demon would be able to do so. And life seizing was when there was another life in that body when it was attached. Kill that life and then occupy the body. It was like possession. However, there were no immortal cultivators here, so the name was different. As soon as Ning Chen finished speaking, he saw the weak demon under him widening her eyes slightly. Monk, what are you talking about? If you want to take advantage of me, so be it. How can you accuse me wrongly? I'm a lotus spirit. Have you seen me turn into a lotus? The most beautiful flower in the world. At this point, she sneered, who can be more beautiful than me? Are other people's flowers as delicate and beautiful as me? The young man was silent for a while before he slowly guessed, it's a demon that loves beauty. Let me guess, what kind of demon are you? He removed her belt with his fingertips. His eyes darkened. Is it a vixen? Wei Wei Bai saw that his actions were becoming more and more abnormal and immediately said, Monk, what's wrong with you? Wake up, you're being controlled by the darkness again. Ning Chen turned a deaf ear to him. The belt fell off from his snow-white fingertips. Or daffodils. His tone was calm. His movements became rough, as if he wanted to crush her into pieces. Wei Wei Bai finally started to fight back, but one of her hands was held in place by him, while the other was hitting him with all her might. He was as hard as a rock. Her strength was in his eyes. Too weak. Was this also the reason why she immediately absorbed the life force of the humans after possessing them? No wonder he was unwilling to recite and cultivate. Of course he was unwilling. Before possessing a lotus, he must have been a great demon. A demon that had tasted a human would not turn back, and could not be saved. She could possess him again because of heaven's punishment. Wei Wei Bai felt that Monk Ning was possessed. Why did he suddenly think that she was possessed? Alright, although it was true. But the system's technology would not be so bad that it would be found out that she was an outsider. In the past, there were no big shots who could see through the high-end immortal cultivation world. Chapter 2994. It was impossible for Monk Ning to see through it with his sharp eyes. So she frowned and tears appeared in her eyes. She said fiercely, "Monk Ning, don't talk nonsense. Who's taking your life? If your brain isn't clear, go take a bath. Don't accuse people wrongly." Ning Chen's movements paused slightly. Then he curled his lips and sneered. A Buddhist bead flew from the string of beads. It floated above them. Ning Chen's tone was calm, but there was a hint of suppressed excitement. This Buddhist bead contains the experience of the past abbot of Wanyuan Temple. It's used for investigation. The Buddhist bead emitted a faint white light. In the hazy light, the youth said softly, "Look, your body is an ordinary lotus. Without an outsider controlling it, it's impossible for it to become a demon." He had never doubted it. He had never thought of using this to examine her. Until he realized that she was hiding something. She began to kill people, and even heavenly punishment appeared. Wei Wei Bai looked up. "Hot dog." In the white light, a pile of information about her lotus body appeared. It was ancient language, and it took a lot of effort to translate. A few hundred words of summary. It was impossible for her lotus to become a demon. There were no conditions, no reason, and not enough time. It was completely immature. It was just an ordinary lotus. Since lotus flowers couldn't become demons, but if they did, wouldn't they be possessed by an outsider? "You've screwed up everything." The target of this plane's attack, the Buddhist bead in her hand, were it a gift? How could it be so heaven-defying? Wei Wei Bai felt that her face was a little swollen from the slap, but it was fine. She was thick-skinned and could still bear it. So she pinched his cheek hard with her fingers. "Let go of me. I don't know what you're talking about. I was a lotus spirit when I woke up. If you say I'm not, then what am I?" "You're mistaken, monk." Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a long time, as if he wanted to see if she was lying. But after looking at her quietly for a while, he sighed softly. "At this time, you're still thinking of seducing me." Her eyes were blurred, and her delicate face was full of excitement. Even if she was just looking at him, she could instantly seduce him. "Wei Wei Bai," Ning Chen calmly said, "there's no need to tempt me. I've already," his words were muffled on her lips. "I've fallen." "Wei Wei Bai, just speak, don't get agitated." "Stop." Couldn't he explain clearly before continuing? "What's the hurry?" Inside the dark tower, the youth would occasionally sigh softly and whisper, "Don't run, you can't escape from this place." Then, the girl said something vaguely. Soon, the sound disappeared. Darkness spread out endlessly. It was like hell, but also like heaven. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was not a lotus spirit, but a dried salted vegetable. She spent a lot of effort to explain, but all she got in return was Monk Ning's even more terrifying means. Normally, an honest person would be inhumane when he went berserk. And he was stubborn. In the beginning, when he didn't accept it, he wouldn't be swayed no matter how high his favorability was. Once he started to do something, no matter how she rejected him, he would not budge. They would only be more single-minded in reclaiming the land. She curled up in a corner, the chains on her slender ankles falling heavily to the ground. The girl hugged herself and rested her head on her knees. Her ink-black hair was scattered all over her fair body. She was so enchanting and pure that it was soul-stirring. Even the traces of damage on the corners of her lips were so seductive that it made one's heart tighten. He was willing to become her servant. The youth stretched out his fingers and took his monk's robe. The wide male robe draped over her body. Chapter 2995. The girl, however, cowered and retreated backwards. Ning Chen reached out and grabbed her shoulder. His strength was still a little rough. He lowered his head and approached her. His breath was still unstable. Don't hide from me. This is very simple for you, isn't it? The young man's tone was light, but it contained a cold hatred. Your every move was born to charm. In the land of darkness, there are indeed charming demons like you. They are all masters who bring disaster to countries and people. As he spoke, he slowly stretched out his finger and gently touched her back. After you possessed the lotus, to get more power, you targeted me as your target. Possession, seduction, target. Cough cough, it was all right. But she was not a demon, but a human with a system. Thinking about it this way, the system was actually very similar to a demon. Monk Ning was too smart. Almost all of his guesses were correct. This made Wei Wei Bai have to gather her emotions and suppress what little conscience she had left when she wanted to refute. Only then could she raise her head confidently and smile coldly. Monk, so what if I seduce you? I like you, can't I seduce you? When have you ever seen me bring disaster to countries and people? Is this what you wronged me for? Speaking of this, her face and eyes turned red. She felt very wronged. I am a lotus spirit. You wronged me. You are a bad person. Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something. She stretched out her fingertips and emitted a weak purifying power. Are you being controlled? Her fingers were held by him. The young man's breath was entangled. His thin lips kissed her lips. Then his voice was calm. Didn't I tell you? Wei Wei Bai was confused. The young man's voice lowered. It was never these things that controlled me. It was me who indulged and controlled them. He was born with a Buddhist bone. From the day he was touched by darkness, it condensed. In the end, it condensed into a dark hell. But the Buddhist bone was only touched. It was not contaminated. The purity of the Buddhist bone was still there, but it was covered with darkness. As long as he did not indulge himself, the darkness could not control him. And if he indulged, then he would not lose his mind, because this was what he wanted to do in the first place. What control was there to talk about? He was just following his heart. The young man's voice was soft and slow, as if he was chanting scriptures. You seduced me, and I was seduced. At this point, he smiled faintly. It's a pity that I'm not the same as your previous victims. They might be prey that you can casually abandon, but I'm the hunter. As he spoke, his fingertips caressed her face. Sentimental and gentle. You are my prey. Once I catch you, you will either die in my hands or be locked up here for the rest of your life. Demon Subduing Tower. It was the place where he kept the demons. When he noticed that something was wrong with her, he began to purge the demons here. He would rather be wrong. He didn't want to use it here. Even if your memories are incomplete, you must have done something extremely evil before you possessed me. That's why Sky's punishment followed you. Even if you possess me, you won't be able to escape this punishment. He gently wrapped the wide robe around the girl's slender body. Possession, seduction, murder, all of these are capital crimes. Ning Chen's tone was unusually soft, as if he was patiently explaining to an ignorant child. I won't kill you, but everything has a price. You will pay with your own body, understand? Wei Wei Bai, I won't bully an honest person anymore. When an honest person becomes perverted, he's actually so evil. Saying things like paying with your own body, he doesn't even blush at all. Ning Chen didn't care about her shocked expression at all. He slowly combed her hair, then stood up and waved his hand. So a huge and thick chain fell from the sky. It was isolated between them. Wei Wei Bai curled up on the other side of the chain wall. Ning Chen calmly stood there. He slowly said, I'll go make you a pastry. If you like this, or if you like a soft blanket or pillow, I'll bring it for you. Wei Wei Bai was dumbfounded. The young man had already turned around and walked out step by step. When the door opened, sunlight spilled in, but it couldn't shine on the other side of the chain wall. The girl curled up in the darkness, looking exceptionally fragile and pitiful. She reached out and grabbed the thick chain in front of her. Her voice trembled, "Monk, you're going to lock me up here." Ning Chen's footsteps paused. He nodded indifferently, "Yes, you'll be here before I die." Wei Wei Bai's face was pale. She finally couldn't suppress her anger. "You're crazy, I didn't do anything heartless. Those I killed were all bad people, you can't do this to me." Ning Chen was silent for a while. Then he turned his head and revealed a smile. "Your biggest crime was never this, but seducing me." The door slowly closed. The young man's calm voice sounded in the pagoda. And it succeeded. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. Transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. The is at https://m, Sashu. Com the button at the bottom to record this chapter. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like Transmigration system, male god, come here. Comma. Chapter 2996. The door slammed shut. Wei Wei Bai returned to normal from her pitiful state. She touched her face and sighed in self-pity. It was such a beautiful mistake that it drove an honest person crazy. Monk Ning was the typical honest and shy type. In the end, she went overboard and drove him to such a neurotic state. The system was confused. What's wrong? What happened? Why was the screen blocked for so long this time? I thought you were struck by lightning and your body turned into a mosaic. It was blocked because it involved blood and violence. Then he finally saw his surroundings clearly. This was a wall made of iron chains. And the cuffs on the host's ankles? Even the familiar and beautiful white monk's robe on the host. Ah. He thought of something. The system said, "You are," the host was calm, "Don't mention it. If you mention it, I'll block it." The system understood, "Oh, I know." Then the host and the system fell into deep silence. Finally, the system said, "Let's play the game." Wei Wei Bai said, "Okay, this time I must eat that gold coin." Then the system and the host happily played the difficult version of Super Mario together. As for being imprisoned, blackened, and sick, what was there to be excited about? It was such a normal thing, just treat it like eating, drinking, and breathing. When Ning Chen came back with the food box, he saw Wei Wei Bai curled up in a corner. She was wearing the clothes he gave her and was in a daze. He moved his finger and the wall of chains automatically separated and retreated into the darkness. Bai Wei Wei was in the middle of playing games with the system. The most difficult gold coin to eat was about to be in her hands. Suddenly, a hand gently stroked her hair. "Damn it, don't touch her gold coin." Wei Wei Bai waved her hand expressionlessly and slapped that annoying hand away. With this distraction, the gold coin was gone. She even fell into a trap and died. Wei Wei Bai's eyes dimmed. She slowly raised her dead fish eyes and saw Ning Chen's finger stopped in midair. He stared at her indifferently. He seemed to be unable to react. Only then did Wei Wei Bai remember that she was imprisoned. Then, the look in her eyes became even more lifeless. He couldn't let the monk think that his imprisonment was ineffective. What if he had a mental breakdown and finally abandoned everything, finally falling into the darkness and locking her in here? In exchange, she played the game happily. Ning Piao was probably going to break down again. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai quietly shrank back with a look of resistance. Ning Chen was silent for a while, but she didn't have much of a reaction. Instead, she took the food box away and took out her favorite pastries. Her body didn't need food. These pastries were just to satisfy their cravings. What she needed was spirit energy. And the thing that the demon-subduing tower lacked the most was spiritual energy. It had only been a short while, but her face was already somewhat haggard and pale, making her look even more pitiful. Ning Chen picked up a small piece of pastry and brought it to her lips. "Eat some." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. With a dark expression, she turned her face away and ignored him. She even snorted coldly to express her disdain. However, in the next second, her chin was pinched and she was forced to turn around. The piece of pastry was already stuffed into her mouth. He said indifferently, "I made it with the best spiritual herbs. There's no harm in eating more." However, this pitiful amount of spiritual energy didn't have any practical replenishment. It only allowed her to maintain her human form. She couldn't use half of her strength. Chapter 2997. Wei Wei Bai was just about to show off her beautiful spirit and spit on the monk's face. However, Ning Chen had already lowered his head, clasped the back of her neck, pressed her against the wall, and kissed her fiercely. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pressed against his shoulder, staring at him in disbelief. Ning Chen was not too greedy for this kiss, but after making sure that she swallowed it, he left indifferently. His thin lips were stained with some snacks, so he stuck out the tip of his tongue and licked them. Then he said calmly, "Don't waste it, you can't go outside to get spiritual energy now, and there are no human lives for you to squander. If you don't eat some snacks, you will collapse." As he said, he casually raised his hand and tucked her messy hair behind her ear. Then he lowered his head and kissed the tip of her ear and cheeks. Wei Wei Bai was so nervous that she held her breath, as if she could not believe what he was doing. Ning Chen was incomparably indifferent. "You like me, and you have been treating me like this before. I'm just repeating it once. Why are you so surprised?" Bai Weiwei's face was genuinely shocked. Nonsense, it was natural for her to be shameless. But Monk Ning was suddenly shameless too. Was this not surprising enough? Damn, she should not have been too tempted. A good and honest monk, learning from her every day. He had learned bad things. Ning Chen kissed her while feeding her pastries. It was as if he did not feel that his actions were out of line, scary, and unrestrained. Even when he calmly pulled on her robe, wanting to hug her. He was abnormally calm. But he did not restrain himself. Wei Wei Bai felt that this monk was a bit too much, so she immediately stretched out her hands and pinched his neck fiercely. "Monk, you're still saying that you're not being controlled by the darkness. You weren't like this in the past. You weren't so bad and you wouldn't bully me like this. I've killed someone and seduced you. Is this a heinous crime?" Her strength was not enough to leave a mark on his skin. Although he was a human, the power of cultivation was more powerful than any demon. She was just a weak little demoness. No matter how much essence she absorbed, without years of cultivation, she would not be able to struggle for half a round against him. Ning Chen was still unhurried. His voice was low and deep. "You've killed so many people, but you don't have the aura of death on your body. That bit of aura is on your fingers, and it's already dispersed. What did you do with the lives of those who died?" This was a question. He did not find the aura of the person she had killed on her body. Once a fairy began to eat humans and absorb their life force, their souls would definitely be tainted with their aura. Could it be that the purification of the lotus was able to cleanse his body of this smell? Wei Wei Bai said coldly with an expressionless face, "I'm only killing bad people to save people. I don't want their essence, so I'll throw it all away. Ning Chen's fingers paused for a moment, and his tone was somewhat enlightened. Then you're really a good kid. After all, not all demons had the self-control to not touch those living beings. Wei Wei Bai sneered, but you've become bad. Ning Chen faintly hummed in agreement. She stretched out her clean and fair fingers and gently touched her eyelashes. It was stained with the moisture of tears. He was very careful and extremely gentle. Wei Wei Bai's gaze softened a little, and then she was pushed down. Ning Chen gently bent down, his eyes tinged with a hint of intoxication. His voice was hoarse. Don't move, I'm just touching you. Wei Wei Bai, no, it didn't seem like he was just touching her. It felt more like he was going to touch her again and again, touch her again and again. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2998. Monk Ning had never seen a woman before, so once he did, his self-control would disappear. He would not know how to control himself at all. It was impossible for Wei Wei Bai not to move. How could she express her fear, confusion, and resistance towards his change? You can't keep me locked up. My mistake of killing those bad people is not enough to be brought here. She thought that if she explained, he would understand. He would even let her out. Ning Chen calmly rubbed her hair, then gradually increased his strength. He grabbed her slender wrist and pressed her against the cold wall. He slowly leaned over, his eyelashes drooping slightly. His eyes were slightly dark, making the cinnabar between his eyebrows look incomparably gorgeous. The youth said in a low voice, "Be good, don't struggle. My self-control is not good now. I let the darkness spread freely. I don't want to go out and harm the common people, so I can only use it to harm you." When he said this, he gently kissed her cheek. His movements were neither slow nor fast. You are still not sensible. Whether the crime is big or not, the right to decide is in my hands. You were born in the spiritual pool at my door. You have never had the right to decide. You were born to be mine. He was too close. His breath brushed against her neck, and his kiss had already begun to fall on her collarbone. It doesn't matter if you escaped from hell to escape from heaven's punishment and possessed the lotus. Or if there were other reasons, you had to kill. The girl's soft voice began to beg for mercy. But he was indifferent. Just like in the past when he forced her to recite the scriptures, he pushed forward bit by bit without wavering. No matter how distracted she was or how resistant she was, she would calmly finish the matter. The youth's breath was also a little chaotic. But his words were already cold in this silent space. It doesn't matter if you are just tempting me for fun or doing bad things for fun. He whispered softly and lovingly. The Buddha's heart hell opened because of you. You have to bear it. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with tears. I don't understand. You have changed. You are not the monk from before. The youth looked at her quietly. His thin lips suddenly curled up slightly. His eyes flashed, slowly revealing a beautiful smile. A gloomy and dark hell. A pure and holy young man. They were as gorgeous as the red spider lily and emitted a decadent aura. I've never changed. I've just endured until I met you. His tone was light, but it was so serious that it made people's backs go numb. I just don't want to bear with it. Therefore, even if she had turned over a new leaf now, she would not be able to change her ways. Perhaps he had wronged her. She was still that innocent little lotus flower. It was useless. When he took that step, he couldn't take it back. Darkness poured out. The only place he could vent was here. After he turned into a demon, no matter how many people he harmed, it would not be as good as harming her alone. Because she was the only one who could stir his emotions and condense his desires. He couldn't let go of her. It was not that he was unwilling, but that he was powerless. Ning Chen lowered his head, kissed her, and explained patiently. It's fine if you don't understand. All you need to know is that you have to stay with me in this dark place until I die. You'll stay with me for as long as I live. Such a kindergarten-level explanation. She should understand now. Wei Bai understood. Wasn't it just a monk eating meat? He had never eaten meat or chewed on bones since he was born. But she tempted him with braised pork every day. Then, he finally licked a mouthful of meat. From then on, it was out of control and he relied on her. He ate her like she was meat every day. Chapter 2999. Moreover, how could she explain that this plate of meat was good meat, not bad, and did not need to be cleaned up? He still did not give up and wanted to continue cleaning. There was no other way, because he did not care whether she was good or bad from the beginning. What he cared about was that he wanted to eat meat. And as the instigator, she had to be responsible for filling his stomach. Who cared whether she was good or bad? Monk Ning left after eating his fill. Before he left, he even made a small bed for her, a soft blanket, and a big pillow. There was also a small table, and on the table was a small basin. The basin was filled with water from the spirit pool, and the mist that came out was spirit energy. Spirit energy could replenish her energy and make her body feel better. Wei Bai looked haggard, feeling that she was the first spirit that was squeezed dry by a human. The system came back to take a look. It saw that its host's slender body was wrapped in Monk Ning's white monk robe. This was Monk Ning's best and most handsome artifact. He put it on her so that her fragile body would not be eroded by the cold of the demon-subduing tower. But it was too loose, and when she wore it, it felt like a child secretly wearing an adult's clothes. The system glanced at its host and saw that she was lishless. Could it be that she was destroyed too much? It immediately searched for food to see if there was anything that could be given to her to nourish her body. If this continued, what would happen to her kidney failure? Wei Bai suddenly sighed, I can't finish the game, and I don't have a strategy anymore. Her gold coins were not late. Then she fell into a trap and died. She could not get past this level. The system was silent for a while, then it opened the game. Well, then let's continue. Wei Bai's eyes lit up, and she nodded, if I don't pass this time, I want to torture people. System. Host, you have finally transcended everything. Torturing people was not because they were sick, but because they did not pass the game and were in a bad mood. But thinking about the past, the system felt that it was nothing special. Well, it was just a blackened pervert, right? It was used to it, so there was no need to make a fuss. Let's continue the game. In the cold tower, the salted fish host and the system that indulged salted fish happily continued to play the game. This game was well developed. As for the strategy, let's talk about it after the game. This game is so fun. Life went by as Monk Ning ate meat and the host played games. This was a simple yet beautiful day. When Ning Chen was satisfied, his favorability increased by a few points. He was now 93 years old. Wei Bai felt that she should just live a normal life. Not bad. Especially since there were new levels in the game that hadn't been cleared yet. With Monk Ning taking care of them, they were served with good food and drinks. Although the living environment was a little bad, because there was only a small basin of water, it made her look a little listless. However, there was very little sunlight, so it was fine as long as the skin was protected from ultraviolet rays. Moreover, Monk Ning also warmed her bed every day. The environment was quiet and suitable for playing games and watching cartoons. Every now and then, her favorability would slowly increase by 1 or 2 points. Although he knew that the reason for the increase in favorability was because he was satisfied with the food at the beginning. However, as long as he didn't cause any trouble, he would obediently stay here. If he lived like this until Ningchen died, his favorability would be full. Just as Wei Wei Bai was happily playing games with the system, she suddenly heard a voice. Ding, the strategy time has been unlocked. The system's automatic notification sounded. Strategy time, please complete the main mission within 1 month. Wei Wei Bai's smiling face instantly froze. Then, the game character fell into the trap again and died. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the comma. Chapter 3000. In a month, she would get the remaining 7 points of favorability. With Monk Ning's current stubborn character. If he didn't take a long time, he would take 8 to 10 years. Stubborn Ning's favorability wouldn't increase at all. Wei Wei Bai silently put down the game. She couldn't just muddle along and wait for death. She had to seriously plan the strategy. Monk Ning was extremely sullen. He would either not move, or move non-stop. His personality was extremely flawed. Other than that kind of posture, he didn't know how to be flexible in other things. For example, he felt that she was a big demon and a sinner. He would lock her up until the end. He wouldn't doubt whether there would be people who were wronged under the rules of the heavenly Tao. Wei Wei Bai discussed with the system whether she could use the heavenly punishment. The system was silent for a long time before saying, "This thing will always follow you. You being locked in the demon subduing tower is also a kind of protection." The demon subduing tower was actually built by the male lead. Both inside and outside the tower were imprisoned by the Buddhist light. No evil could invade, and no poison could enter. Those who were locked up here, no matter how great the demons or evil things were, they couldn't escape. Moreover, when the array was set up, because it was stained with the power of the Buddhist bone, and the rules of the array were drawn with the male lead's blood, it just happened to contain the rules of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, the heavenly Tao automatically ignored this place and wouldn't attack. As for why the rules drawn by the male lead were close to the rules of the heavenly Tao, he was a proud son of the heavens, so the heavenly Tao liked him. Wei Wei Bai looked at the wall of chains in front of her and thought of the heavenly punishment outside the tower. It was obvious that she couldn't step out of here. No wonder Monk Ning was so assured to leave her here. With her strength, she probably wouldn't be able to open this wall of chains even if she cultivated for hundreds of years. Wei Wei Bai touched her chin and sighed. In other words, the old trick of running away won't work. Monk Ning was too calm and steady. When he locked her up, he had basically cut off all her escape routes. Wei Wei Bai thought about it again. Doesn't he think that I'm an external soul? Why don't I use death escape and possess another creature? This way, he would be able to evade the heavenly punishment for a while, and he would also be able to switch bodies. Wait a minute, if he switched bodies, would the first beauty effect still be there? He was just about to ask. The system said faintly, "This tower is imprisoning souls. Otherwise, there would be so many demons, dragons among demons and phoenixes among demons. Who wouldn't have thought of changing his shell? This was what the demons were good at. How could the male lead not think of this?" Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. That's good. Even if she couldn't bear to part with the most beautiful face in the world. This method could not be used. He had to think of another way. If the plan doesn't work, what's the point? Oh, he couldn't bear to lose face. The two systems chattered for a long time. They all felt that Monk Ning had eliminated all possibilities. As a result, many of the old tricks could not be used. Since he couldn't escape or jump around, he could only find a way to cause trouble in the pagoda. Wei Wei Bai, pretending to be sick. The system took out a small notebook and wrote it down. Try it, you might be able to earn a point. Wei Wei Bai, actively seducing. The system continued to write it down. You can also try, men are very easy to talk to, you might be able to earn a point. Wei Wei Bai, pretending to be pitiful, desolate, cute and coquettish. The system nodded and continued to write it down. Okay, you should be able to get half a point. It kept writing it down and scribbling it down. Slash. Chapter 3001. She took out a list of the tower's strategy points. They all felt that they could add 3 or 4 points to the basic score of 93 points. As for the remaining points, they would wait for about a month before they died. Well, 100 points would be fine. They were all assembly line strategy products. Su Tong and Su Tong looked calm as if they were old employees. They exuded a greasy and familiar temperament. After checking the plan form, Wei Wei Bai said that it was safe. Then, come on, continue playing games. Because of playing games day and night, and the lack of spirit energy, and being destroyed by Monk Ning, the environment in the tower was not good. Wei Wei Bai finally got what she wanted. With a plan, she directly lay down and fell sick. She yawned lazily, afraid that she was not sick enough. She even asked the system to choose the cheapest discounted cold medicine. Cold medicine, cold medicine. You will definitely catch a cold if you eat it. Don't you think it works? Wei Wei Bai ate it and then kicked the monk's robe on the ground. This thing was immune to poison, water, and fire. It also had its own temperature adjustment. After wearing it for a long time, the body became stronger. Throw it away. It was unlikely that a demon would catch a cold, but she ate it and felt cold medicine. Not to mention a demon, even a scion would catch a cold. If she didn't catch a cold, she would ask the system's supermarket for a refund. In the middle of the night, Wei Wei Bai touched her head with relief. Although the fever was not serious, it was enough. Anyway, Monk Ning didn't lock her up because he hated her. He liked her very much. He was just paranoid and dark. He would feel the heartache. When she was in a daze from the fever, she suddenly felt a hand on her forehead. It seemed to be probing something. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled, and she opened her eyes with difficulty. Her white and tender face was full of red, and her eyes were misty. She saw the young man standing by the bed, frowning slightly, and touching her forehead and face with his white and beautiful fingers. Ning Chen looked down at the monk's robe that was thrown on the ground. He pursed his lips then said softly, "You don't have enough spiritual aura right now. The clothes can protect you from harm, so why aren't you wearing them?" Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a while before realizing who he was. She coldly looked away and said in a hoarse voice, "It's all your scent." "I don't want to see it." Ning Chen's fingers paused. His face was a little pale, but his expression was still calm. Then, he reached out his finger and gently touched her slightly dry lips. "Open your mouth." Wei Wei Bai remained indifferent. She even shrunk her body and hid under the blanket. She only revealed her eyes to glare at him in dissatisfaction. The beautiful girl's eyes were filled with tears, as if they would condense into fragile tears at any moment and fall down. It was indescribably pitiful. Ning Chen looked at her in silence for a while before his expression became somewhat dejected. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that he had found his conscience and that her favorability towards him was about to loosen, the youth's fingers were already under the quilt. He stretched out his arm and grabbed her waist, pulling her into his embrace. The quilt was between the two of them. He felt that it was a hindrance. With a cold expression, he pulled the quilt away and threw it on the ground. It was accompanied by the white monk's robes. Wei Wei Bai was a little dazed. She felt that there was something wrong with the monk's reaction. Wouldn't most people start to comfort him? Why did he suddenly go berserk? Before she could kick him away, the youth had already bent down. His hot thin lips pressed against her cheek. His strong breathing was messy and heavy. His voice was low and hoarse. Don't move. Let me see what's wrong with you. /save button. Chapter 3002. What was he looking at? Or did he want to do something else? Wei Wei Bai felt that she should refuse. Her eyes were full of resistance, but she couldn't avoid the youth's strong hug. His fingers began to examine her body inch by inch. Wei Wei Bai, this was taking advantage of her, right? It must be. The youth's slightly warm fingertips lightly touched her neck. The fragile girl was unusually light, cute, and soft. Her breath was fresh, and her soul was clean. She didn't have the malicious aura of a demon's territory at all. Ning Chen examined her again and made sure that she was fine. Demons weren't humans. If it didn't involve their lives, they wouldn't easily show symptoms of illness. He examined her soul and found that it wasn't damaged. The youth looked up, his ink-black eyes calm and serious. What method did you use to deliberately make yourself so fragile? Wei Wei Bai's white cheeks were stained with red, and her eyes were full of mist. Even if she stared at him, she still looked unusually soft. Her voice was thin and weak, like an injured kitten. Her tone even had a soft feeling. Monk, is it fun to always wrongly accuse me? You suspect that I'm sick, and you suspect that I've killed someone. You clearly don't have any evidence, and you're just relying on your stubborn guess to sentence me to death. Do you, sob, hate me that much? She pursed her lips, and her tears finally turned into water droplets, falling from her clear eyes. Ning Chen's heart trembled fiercely when he was swept by her weak and pitiful eyes. He even felt sad. He lowered his thick eyelashes, casting a faint shadow under his eyes. It made his eyes even gloomier. Finally, the youth's voice softened a bit. I just care about you too much. He cared so much that he couldn't kill her. Her brain wasn't good, and she lacked common sense. Demons wouldn't get sick, but their souls would be damaged, causing them to look like they were sick. Her soul wasn't damaged, and the only thing that made her uncomfortable and fragile was the lack of spiritual energy. But if the spiritual energy was so lacking that it hurt her, she would directly turn into a lotus. If she didn't turn into a lotus, it meant that the spiritual energy was barely enough, and it wouldn't make her sick. It wasn't that she was pretending to be sick. Maybe she used some method to force herself into this state. To gain his sympathy. He had fought with the fiendish demons for so many years. The darkness in the Buddha's heart hell was filled with all sorts of schemes. It was unscrupulous and had no limits to its enticement. If one step is wrong, he would not have the chance to lock her up. Because he was already dead. Her little scheme, which was full of loopholes, could not be hidden from him. What surprised him was that she was actually able to hide some little secrets from him. Was it some kind of ability that made him sick? All of these understandings and doubts eventually turned into a single sentence from his mouth. Ning Chen lowered his head and gently kissed her tears. Then, he kissed her lips and deepened the kiss. Wei Wei Bai, seeing that she didn't move, he helplessly left her and said in a low voice, "Aren't you going to bite me?" Wei Wei Bai just stared at him blankly with a pale face. Ning Chen could only bite her lower lip and exert force. Beads of blood oozed out. Then, with blood in his mouth, he deepened the kiss. His blood was the kind of blood that demons loved. It was exceptionally nourishing. It was even more perfect than seizing spiritual energy from the outside. He didn't give it to any other demons, but to her. Wei Wei Bai felt that pervert Ning's taste was simply strange. Chapter 3003. Wei Wei Bai then felt that something was wrong. She reached out and touched her. The fever had subsided. Her limbs were no longer weak, and her body had regained its lightness. Was the cold effective? Ning Chen kissed her until she recovered. Then, he reached out and rubbed her messy hair, whispering, "Don't force yourself like this in the future. I won't let you out. You can only die here. Even if you hurt yourself, I have a way to save you." At this point, Ning Chen's thin lips curled up coldly. "You definitely won't like it. I'll turn you into a lotus and raise you here. Then, I'll turn you back." Wei Wei Bai, these cruel words, honest people really shouldn't be provoked. Otherwise, he wouldn't be angry all the time. If he was angry, he might be angry for a lifetime. Just when Wei Wei Bai felt that pretending to be sick was useless, the youth in front of her picked up the monk's robe on the ground and shook it. The monk's robe turned into a blanket. This was a magic weapon that could transform into various forms according to the user's ability. The blanket was light and soft. He draped it over her body. Then, he silently turned around and left. When he returned, he brought a water basin. The water in the spiritual pool was inside. He twisted a clean handkerchief and carefully wiped her face and body. His fingers were trembling slightly, and even his breathing was chaotic. But he didn't indulge his desires. With every step he took, the shadow below him was abnormally dark. This meant that his inner demon had reached a stage where he couldn't get rid of it. And such a Ning Chin could force himself not to touch her and not indulge his desires. He was already forcing himself to the limit to make a sacrifice. Then, he made a few soft and sweet pastries and fed her little by little. The normal feeding method. Wei Wei Bai didn't do anything else. After he wiped her lips clean, he turned around and was about to get something else. The girl behind him leaned over softly and reached out to hug his waist. She was relying on him like before. "Monk, don't be angry, okay?" Her voice was weak, but her tone was gentle. "I won't do bad things in the future. Don't make me angry." Ning Chen didn't look back. He just lowered his eyes and looked at her fingers that were hugging his waist. His thin red lips pursed and a trace of sadness appeared in his dark eyes. The girl didn't get a response from him, so she slowly fell silent. She just stubbornly hugged him. Ning Chen didn't maintain the same posture. He didn't turn his head or make a sound. In the gloomy pagoda, the two of them were silent. An aura of despair and sorrow pervaded the air. Finally, the girl couldn't take it anymore. She pressed her forehead against his back and cried in a low voice. "Monk, how can you be so ruthless? How can you lock me up for life? Why don't you just kill me? I want to go out. Let me out. Don't bully me anymore." She cried too pitifully and too weakly. Her choking sobs were more like dense thorns that pierced the hearts of others. Ning Chen's body stiffened. He clenched his fists, but he didn't respond or move. It was like a solidified stone. Only the pitiful cries of the young girl echoed in the deep and dark pagoda. When she finally got tired of crying and released him, Ning Chen silently turned back, pressed her on the bed and covered her with a quilt. Gentle and strong. Stubborn and affectionate. He also quietly bent down and untied the chains on her feet. Bai Weiwei's eyes were red, and her face was also red. She was exhausted, but she couldn't jump up and play any tricks. Ning Chen sat by the bed and reached out to gently stroke her hair. Finally, he spoke. "Can't sleep. I'll recite the scriptures for you. Wei Wei Bai, then, Monk Ning seriously recited the scriptures for her. Wei Wei Bai looked like she had nothing to live for. She listened to the hypnotic scriptures and finally fell asleep. Ning Chen sat by the bed and silently looked at her for a long time. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her. Then, he turned and walked out. The door was closed again. When he stepped out of the pagoda, he saw all the monks of Wan Yuan Temple gathered outside. They were looking at the sky as if they were facing a great enemy. Ning Chen also looked up indifferently. The dark clouds in the sky were rolling. The thunder dragon was faintly discernible in the dark clouds. It was terrifying. An old monk walked over and respectfully bowed. Martial uncle, this heavenly punishment is not small. The demon in the pagoda may have committed a heinous crime. Should we? Ning Chen looked up slightly. His eyes were extremely cold. The scene fell silent. No one dared to speak. Ning Chen looked at the sky quietly again. The heavenly punishment had not left. When this punishment fell, one's soul would be scattered and return to nothingness. At that time, if he wanted to find her, he wouldn't be able to find her even if he went to heaven or hell. So, how could he let her out of the pagoda? Only the power of the pagoda's array could protect her from the heavenly punishment. If he let her out, she was playful and disobedient. Once she left his side for a while. He couldn't bear the consequences. Ning Chen stood in the cold wind. The prayer beads on his wrist floated. Under his messy short hair, his eyes were cold and calm. The people locked in the demon-subduing tower, whether they are demons or demons, are all under my protection. His words were extremely calm. If the heavenly Tao stops me, I will go against the heavenly Tao. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 95, //. Chapter 3004. The system silently took out the information and began to record the male lead's ability. Damn it, the information on the male lead's strategy was getting less and less. It gave the system the wrong information every day, causing their strategy to be obstructed. As the system typed, it punished itself for not eating chocolate, only eating chocolate powder and cucumber slices. Wei Wei Bai was counting with her fingers. It seems that it's hard to fool the monk about the soul, but 90+ favorability is enough to make him unable to do anything to me when I'm lying. For example, he knew that she was pretending to be sick. If she cried miserably, his mind would be shaken. As for the missing information, Wei Wei Bai said that the system tried its best, it must be too poor. The equipment was old, and it couldn't bear to replace it. That was why the information was so incomplete. That was why Wei Wei Bai couldn't bear to use this to scold the system. After all, it was poor, old. It hurt his self-esteem too much. If the system was defeated, how could he chase Soft Connect in the future? The system asked, "Can you sell 100 favorability points in a month?" Wei Wei Bai thought seriously for a while, then shook her head lightly. The previous strategy on the assembly line won't work. Although the monk's favorability has increased to 95, it won't be easy to increase the last 5 points. After all, in his eyes, she was now a sinful demon who was suffering the punishment of the heavens. He loved her to this extent. It was already the limit. Monk Ning didn't want to open up the inner demon. So when she opened up the inner demon, he couldn't suppress it. Ning Chen should hate her. Such hatred caused his favorable impression points to stop at 99 and never reach 100. Wei Wei Bai hugged the clothes and quilt given by Monk Ning, her face calm and silent. The system also silently chewed on the cucumber, not disturbing her. Finally, Wei Wei Bai said, since he cares so much about his Buddhist heart's hell not being solved, and I made the inner demon run wild, then let him fulfill his wish, and the favorability will increase. The system nodded, then flipped through the information. His inner demons are different from others. It is very difficult to resolve them. That dark world of his is caused by the dark aura of all things in the world when he is cultivating. Therefore, there were many desires and inner demons. None of them belonged to the male lead. Instead, all kinds of demons, humans, and living creatures were affected by the characteristics of the Buddha bone. It was like the Buddha bones were glue. Then, when it fell into a dirty place, it would automatically stick to a lot of things that did not belong to the glue itself. And these things were still glue's troubles. If the glue itself was to return to its original, transparent and pure appearance, it was almost impossible to get the filth out bit by bit. That was why the male lead could only suppress her and then use the stupidest method. He didn't understand lust or desire. It would not increase the burden of the Buddha bones. Then, day by day, the dark aura was removed bit by bit. But after the host appeared, he didn't have the time to get rid of the dark aura, and he even developed desires. In fact, it could even be said that they were deeply in love with each other. The inner demon had finally defeated him, the jailer who had imprisoned him. Then, the male lead himself became the greatest accomplice of the inner demon. More accurately, he was the manipulator. He was dirty, so he didn't clean it up. In any case, he would just be dirty, and then drag the host to be dirty too. After the system told her some of the information it knew and speculated, Wei Bai nodded. I think so too, so Monk Ning's current mentality is actually self-abandoning. I'm afraid that he has suicidal tendencies. // To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 3005. Every time she resisted, he would stare at her with his deep eyes without moving. Then he would lick her ears slowly and whisper, "If I die, you won't have to suffer so much." Thinking of those images, Bai Weiwei, expressionless, reached out and pinched her ear. She didn't mean anything else, it was just an itch in her ear. Then she said, "That's why I think Monk Ning didn't plan to live for long. He was originally pure, but he was forced into this state. He probably wanted to find a reason to kill himself. His current inner demon was only limited to her. It was tormenting her. But if the inner demon continued to lose control, it would slowly lose its mind and harm the world. Monk Ning was probably not the kind of person who liked to harm the world, because it was rare to meet such a difficult attacker. Wei Bai studied the information with the system. In the end, they finally decided on a plan. Wei Bai said with a melancholy face, "This plan, if it doesn't succeed, it will really fail." The system looked worried. "Yes, it's too risky." Wei Bai nodded in agreement. Then Su Tong and the system fell into deep silence again. Finally, Wei Bai said, "Let's play games." The system picked up the game console. "Okay, we will definitely succeed this time." Wei Bai said, "Yes, there is no gold coin that I can't eat." Then the system and the host fell into the game again, unable to extricate themselves. What was the strategy? After working for a long time, as an old fox lying in a deep fryer that was about to be fried into black charcoal, Su Tong said that playing games was more fun. Ning Chen walked out of the Hall of Buddhas. His expression was steady, and his footsteps were a little staggered. He looked back at the hall. The Buddha statue inside was very strict, but it also contained the power of love. He stretched out his hand, and a red lotus seed appeared in his palm. This was the lotus seed that had been raised in front of the Buddha statue for 100 years. It was also a rare plant-type artifact in Wanyuan Temple. It was a great supplement for plant spirits. Ning Chen looked at the red lotus seed in her palm and a trace of worry appeared on her cold face. After all, the demon-subduing tower was a place that suppressed demons. She stayed too long. It would harm the source. The shadow under Ning Chen's feet was too heavy. When he entered the inner palace for a moment, he couldn't move. This was because the 10,000 Buddhas Hall was a peaceful place that did not allow people with desires to enter. He had forced his way in, but he had still suffered a backlash. Ning Chen slowly walked towards the devil-subduing tower. When he opened the door, he saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the bed. She seemed to be very bored and was counting her fingers. Hearing the sound of the door opening, she just lazily turned around to look at him. Then, she ignored him and turned her head again, continuing to count her fingers. She didn't even read the Buddhist scriptures that he gave her. Ning Chen pursed his lips but didn't say anything. He just waved the chains away. Then, he walked to the bedside and reached out to touch her face to make sure that she didn't abuse him or make him sick again. Only then did he take out the lotus seed and say softly, "Eat it." Wei Wei Bai felt a huge amount of spiritual energy. She frowned and looked down at the 100-year-old holy object. "Isn't this the calming thing in your temple? Why are you giving it to me?" Ning Chen was silent for a while before he said calmly, "Eat it. You can consolidate your cultivation and purify your evil aura from before." This was the main point. Reduce and clean up the evil she had done before. Then, she would stay here. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like. Chapter 3006. If Sky Law couldn't smell her breath, he would leave. She didn't know what she had done, but Sky Law was chasing her so relentlessly. Ning Chen wasn't willing to pursue her mistakes. He only wanted her. He would cover for her no matter what she had done. As for the future, he wouldn't let her do bad things. She couldn't see anyone else other than him. At least, that was the case before he died. A trace of Buddhist light appeared on Ning Chen's finger. The Buddhist light entered the lotus seed, and the red lotus seed became as soft as water. Then he stuffed the lotus seed into her mouth. Wei Wei Bai was slightly stunned. Seeing that the lotus seed was about to enter her stomach, she didn't hesitate. She hugged his neck with both hands, raised her head, and kissed him fiercely. She forcefully stuffed the lotus seed back into his mouth. The chaotic kiss was accompanied by a large amount of sweet and cool spiritual energy. Ning Chen reacted quickly. He pressed her on the bed, grabbed her wrists, and didn't let her move. After that, he immediately left her lips. But there was still a large amount of spiritual energy entering his body. And the girl under him had a soft smile on her cold face. She said cheerfully, "Monk, you need this more than me now. You're plagued by inner demons. After eating it, you might be able to wake up. Then you'll find that there's nothing good about women. It's better to be empty." Her smiling words carried a hint of melancholy. Ning Chen pursed his lips tightly. He couldn't spit out what he had just eaten. Although there were many ways to replenish spiritual energy for plant spirits. But the lotus seed just now had a more important function, which was to cleanse her sins. He protected her. Sky Law was powerless. But in the future, he was dead, and she was still alive. At that time, how could she face Sky Law's pursuit? Ning Chen lowered his eyes and looked at the girl who still had an innocent and ignorant face. She didn't understand his good intentions at all. A willful and reckless demon. He lowered his eyes quietly. His thick eyelashes covered half of his gloomy eyes. He was about to say something. But he heard the girl murmur in a low voice, "If you really want to give me a gift, give me a mirror, monk." He had decorated the pagoda quite comfortably. But he forgot to give her a mirror. She hadn't seen her own face recently, and she felt like she was withering away. A life where all he could do was play games. What an ordinary and boring life. The girl's soft voice carried a trace of complaint. You really don't understand a woman's heart, Monk. She finally saw a shadow of her former lively self. Ever since he locked her up and even hugged her. She always looked resentful towards him, and most of the time, she ignored him. After eating the lotus seed, Ning Chen's complexion looked much better, but the shadow of the heart demon still didn't fade. His inner demons would never be healed. It was as if she had regained her spirit, but when he stared at her, dark thoughts began to flourish. The cuter she was, the better. The more greedy he was. Ning Chen hesitated for a while and finally couldn't restrain himself. He lowered his head and kissed her smiling lips. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment before she frowned and wanted to turn her head away. But he reached out and held her face, not letting her escape. Finally, his breathing became heavy and he distanced himself from her. She was already blushing and said angrily, Monk, control yourself. Don't say you can't control yourself. Where's your self-control when chanting scriptures? Ning Chen's hair had grown a lot, but he had never taken care of it. His hair was scattered under his eyes, and there was a trace of suppressed heat in his beautiful eyes. Slash. Chapter 3007. His voice was hoarse and gentle. I can't control myself when I see you. Why don't you recite the scriptures for me? I might be able to control myself. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. She looked at him suspiciously for a while before reciting the scriptures in a low voice. As expected, Ning Chen did not move. He maintained this ambiguous position. He listened to her reciting the scriptures obediently. The girl's voice was soft. It was not as serious as it should be when she was reciting the scriptures. Then, the sound of her chanting suddenly stopped. Ning Chen lowered his head and kissed her again. Wei Wei Bai, this monk was like a wolf or a tiger. Damn it, it was because he had been suppressed for too long that the floodgates opened and he drowned. She felt that she was going to become a demon. Because the strategy required a tool. After a few days, it was the discount period in the supermarket. So, as she played games with the system while waiting for the discount. When she got the tool, it was almost time to leave. The days passed slowly for more than half a month. Bai Weiwei felt that her originally white skin had been whitened by more than one color. There was not much sunlight in the pagoda. The window at the top of the pagoda leaked that little bit of light. It was not enough for her to replenish calcium in the sun, causing her to feel that her bones were loose. So many times in captivity. The imprisonment this time could be considered to be a prison with no blind spots. Wei Wei Bai experienced the feeling of not being able to get out no matter how hard she tried. Ning Chen was as calm and experienced as a dog in everything he did. Don't try to fool him. Wei Wei Bai was silently counting the gold. Ning Chen, that guy. She wanted a mirror, but he did not give it to her. In the end, the next day, he started to bring her some gold, silver, gems, jewelry, and so on. What could these things do? She was at a loss. However, she saw the young man gently caressing her face and saying gently, demons like to store things. I didn't give them to you before because I was afraid that you would become greedy. Now that I know that you are greedy, I'll give them to you. Wei Wei Bai held the silver and gold in both hands. She felt that she was a fairy-like little demon. It was so tacky. Moreover, she was already locked up in here. How could she use these things to play marbles? Well, playing marbles was also a game. Therefore, she did not refuse. Ning Chen liked to stay with her more and more, and he liked to touch her. It was as if he felt that every second he touched her was a second too little. He couldn't wait to hold her in his arms and caress her every day. Sometimes, Wei Wei Bai felt that she was a dough that was about to be kneaded into bread by Monk Ning. She looked around and saw that the basin had turned into a water tank. There were also lotus leaves growing inside for her to replenish her spiritual energy. There were tables and chairs, and the table was quite good. She bent over the table to play with the marbles, which were quite big. As for the young man sitting opposite him, he had a silent expression as he wrote scriptures. He saw the golden beads on the scripture. He reached out and brushed them away. Then he continued to write the scripture. His inner demons were so strong that even Buddha despised his desires. It was no wonder that he was the best guardian of Buddhism in the past 100 years. He's already fallen, yet he still insists on chanting scriptures. If it weren't for her, he would probably be able to return to normal again with his own strength after falling into the devil. Wei Wei Bai sighed in boredom. If it weren't for the strategy that was about to be completed. This kind of boring life was really cool. After Ning Qin finished writing the scripture, he calmly closed the scripture. Then he stretched out his white fingertips. The light of Buddha fell into the scripture. The scripture suddenly burned, and the golden flames burned the scripture into golden light spots. He calmly took out a mirror from his sleeve, and the light spots entered the mirror. The mirror became clean and beautiful. The golden beads on Wei Wei Bai's fingers fell. She stared at the mirror. Then she saw Ning Qin put the mirror on the table, took out a sandalwood comb, and slowly walked behind her. Then he gently reached out, held her hair, and began to comb her hair. Mirrors have many uses. For some demons, it's also an escape route. I'll seal it and give it to you. So he didn't give her a mirror before. Was he afraid that the mirror would give her a chance to escape? Wei Wei Bai didn't refuse his combing action. Instead, she held her face with both hands and stared blankly at the mirror. With a mirror, her life was complete. Ning Qin saw that she liked the mirror, so he also lightly pursed his lips, revealing a gentle expression. He gently combed her hair. Suddenly he heard the girl say softly, "Monk, only couples get along like this." Ning Chen's fingers paused. Then he heard her casually say, "You also have hair. I'll comb it for you later." Ning Chen was silent for a long time before he gently continued to comb her hair. Then he softly said, "N. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 96. / Chapter 3008. The youth slowly opened his eyes. He touched his body with his fingers and the warmth beside him disappeared. He immediately got up, his face pale, but he saw that there was no one in the empty pagoda except for him. The mirror on the table was placed casually, but the demoness who passed by and sat there looking at the mirror was gone. In the empty pagoda, it was dark and lonely. His eyes trembled as he walked around the pagoda, looking for her. The darkness slowly eroded his body, following his footsteps. Every step he took, the viscous darkness flowed. He had locked her up so tightly. How could she escape? Ning Chen looked at the tightly shut door and was about to push it open. But he heard a delicate and impatient voice calling him. "Monk." Ning Chen turned around in panic and found that he was still lying on the bed, and the person his fingers were grabbing was the girl he was looking for. Wei Wei Bai frowned and tried to pull her hand back. "Monk, just sleep. Why do you want to remove my arm?" Ning Chen looked at her in a daze for a while before he relaxed and let go of her hand. The girl immediately rubbed her arm in dissatisfaction and muttered a curse at him. She looked alive. Still beside him. Ning Chen's lips were pale with fright. He suddenly reached out again and hugged her. He hugged her tightly. He was afraid that she would disappear. His inner demon was getting stronger and stronger. The hell of the inner demon knew what he was most afraid of. She was missing. So every time he was pulled into an illusion, he couldn't find her. He continued to search even if he couldn't find her. The inner demon was at the side, laughing at him sinisterly. He was no longer the heartless person who entered the hell of the inner demon. Every time he fell into the inner demon, it was a real hellish torture. The girl was soft and fragile. She didn't resist, as if she knew that it was useless to resist in his arms. She just looked up and looked at him quietly for a long time. Then she said softly, "Monk, are you tired?" The youth's face was unusually pale, and the thick shadows under his eyes gave people an unusually haggard feeling. He rested his chin on her shoulder and didn't say a word. Wei Bai didn't say anything either. She just curled up in his arms and stayed there quietly. When Ning Chen finally recovered from his inner demon, he suddenly heard the girl in his arms whisper, "Monk, why don't you just kill me?" His eyes trembled, but he saw that the girl had already rubbed her face against his chest. Her voice was incomparably calm. "Your shadow has already begun to grow. First, it turned into a dark color. Then, if he couldn't control it, it would become bigger and bigger. In the end, it backfired on him, causing him to go crazy." There was no trace of panic on Ning Chen's pale and indifferent face. He said indifferently, "You don't need to care about this." This was his inner demon. Of course, he knew how serious it was. However, Wei Bai did not care about what he said. Instead, she enunciated each and every word clearly. "If you kill me, you will be freed from these inner demons. So, before you drive yourself crazy and become the scourge of the world, kill me to save yourself." Ning Chen didn't respond. Instead, he reached out and stroked her hair. He sensed her presence and did not leave. The tiredness in his eyes slowly dissipated. While stroking her hair, he kissed her cheek. This was the comfort he instinctively sought after to dispel the fear in his heart after returning from the inner demon hell. Wei Bai muttered for a long time about self-sacrifice. In the end, not only was the monk not moved, his actions became more and more outrageous. Chapter 3009. He kissed her for a while, then said in a low and calm voice, "If you really want to save me, then stay here and don't go anywhere." His inner demon was that she would leave, she would be killed by God's wrath, she didn't like him anymore. Killing her would only make him go even crazier. After saying that, he got up and walked out of the room with steady steps. The shadow behind him looked strange, it was terrifyingly dark. It was like a monster was waiting to come out and eat people. Wei Bai lay on the bed and looked at the shadow expressionlessly. The shadow slowly revealed a hideous and twisted appearance, as if it was going to crawl out and pull her into the dark world. Ning Chen didn't feel anything. He opened the door and let the sunlight in. The shadow was still so dark. It wasn't afraid of the sunlight at all. The door closed again. Ning Chen and his shadow once again disappeared from this lonely pagoda. Wei Bai slowly reached out and twirled a strand of her hair, then said to the system, "Is the product on the shelves?" Monk Ning probably wouldn't be able to control the heart demon by himself. In a few days, Monk Ning would start to go crazy. She didn't have much time left. After counting for about 3.5 days, the time was almost up. The favorability was still at 96. The system flipped through the discount products on the supermarket shelves. "It's here, the bottomless pit absorption meditation sticker. The original price is 1,000 life points. It's already on discount, you can buy one for 100 life points." Wei Bai nodded, "Just buy it." After the system clicked to buy it, he took out the game console and started to repair it. It couldn't be helped, Su Tong had been playing games all this time and broke the console. Now, one of them was repairing the console, while the other had nothing to do, thinking about how to get the last few favorability points. Everyone in the tower turned into moldy pickles. After Ning Chen came out of the tower, he heard the sound of the bell. He looked up at the sky. The faint thunder dragon was still in the dark clouds, faintly discernible. Because it couldn't find anyone, it became unusually gentle, dormant and not scary. It just didn't leave. Ning Chen lowered his eyes, coldly pursing his lips. He knew that it was impossible for Sky Law to leave on her own accord. He had trapped her in the pagoda for so long. She must be going crazy. Ning Chen thought of Wei Wei Bai's lively and restless temperament. She had been suppressing it, but one day, she might not be able to stand it anymore. Let's stay here for a while longer. After he died, no one would lock her up anymore. Ning Chen slowly walked towards the spiritual pool. The spiritual pool was filled with mist. He took out the alms bowl and poured a large amount of spiritual energy into it. The old tortoise at the back of the mountain had also transformed into his human form these past few days and slowly came to find him. Your demonic thoughts have entered your heart. Why didn't you ruthlessly cut off the demonic thoughts? If you can overcome the tribulation of love this time, the power of your Buddha bone will reach great success. You won't have to worry about being tainted by filth anymore. The old turtle had some magical powers. 80 to 90% of what it said could come true. Ning Chen's face was pale, and his dark eyes were unusually cold. What if I fail? His voice was faint and lifeless. The old turtle thought for a moment before saying, "You know what will happen if you fail." Why do you ask me? You have never asked such a childish question before. Sure enough, your heart wavered because of your deep love. Ning Chen's eyes darkened, and his face became paler and paler. The cinnabar between his eyebrows was strange and gorgeous. Then he seemed to come to his senses and muttered to himself, "I will bear all the tribulations. I will not become a scourge to the common people, and I will not let her become a sorrowful soul under Sky Law. Before I die, I will take care of everything." // Collect below to record this reading record. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like. Chapter 30:10. The old turtle still wanted to persuade him. Cut off the inner demon, Ning Chen sneered. I can't cut it off. Don't try to persuade me. If he could really harden his heart, he wouldn't have let himself fall to this point. No matter how bad it was, he would clean up everything. Ning Chen steadily held the alms bowl in his hand and then walked step by step toward the 10,000 Buddha Hall. In the 10,000 Buddha Hall, he sat on a futon. The Buddhas were strict, and the huge power of Buddha began to pressure him. Ning Chen was unmoved. He put the alms bowl in front of him, then stretched out his finger, borrowed the spiritual energy from the alms bowl, and turned it into a knife. He began to slowly remove his spiritual energy meridians. The spiritual energy meridians were the channels through which a person cultivated and absorbed the spiritual energy of the outside world. Without this meridian, one couldn't cultivate. When he removed it, it couldn't be seen from the outside. When the spiritual energy entered the body, he removed it bit by bit. The Buddha bone could be immune to all heavenly punishments. He wanted to remove the Buddha bone and then refine it into a magic weapon to protect her for the rest of her life. During this period of time, he had removed the spiritual energy meridians of his foot bones and hand bones. As long as he was given time, when he removed the complete spiritual energy meridians, he would be able to use the power he erupted before his death to refine the Buddha bone into a magic weapon. It would become a heart-protecting magic weapon in her body. At that time, she could go wherever she wanted. No one would lock her up, and no one would chase after her. The heavenly punishment would also let her go. Even if she committed a great sin in the future, the Buddha bone would still protect her from punishment. With her personality, she definitely wouldn't like such an old-fashioned person like him. She wouldn't like him imprisoning her like this. In his last days, there wasn't much he could do for her. He could only let her go and protect her. No matter what purpose she had in the beginning to seduce him. He had sunk in. This was the truth. Ning Chen's face was pale. He steadily cut off one of his spiritual energy meridians with his fingertips. Spiritual energy meridians were different from muscle meridians. Before completely cutting off the entire spiritual energy meridians, his physical activities wouldn't be affected. Only when he stabbed the knife into the acupoint between his eyebrows could he completely paralyze his whole body. The only effect might be that after the spiritual energy entered the body, it would overflow instead of remaining. As a result, his cultivation stagnated, or even regressed. Under the supervision of the 10,000 Buddhas, the inner demons behind him wouldn't come out to rebel. Although to him, it was a terrible torture. Even in front of the 10,000 Buddha statue, the shadow behind him still refused to give up. It stretched out its pale hands and hugged him from behind. The black shadow turned into that familiar girl. "Monk, you don't want to let me go, right?" She was naturally charming, and her voice was full of emotion. "You just want to lock me up forever and turn into an artifact to protect me. Don't do such a stupid thing. If you die, I'll go find someone else. Are you angry?" Ning Chen's fingers paused. His face was expressionless, and he even started to waver. During this period of time, he had experienced love, resentment, jealousy, and anger. The inner demon was dragging him down with it all the time. If he really committed suicide, the inner demon would die with him. That was why it was trying its best to instigate him. To indulge their desires. Ning Chen only hesitated for a moment when the lotus flower on the Buddha statue suddenly emitted a golden light. The specks of light fell into the shadow. He directly pressed the black shadow down. And Ning Chen was also pressed by this force. His chest felt tight, and he felt something sweet in his throat. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The inner demon was himself, and he was the inner demon. So attacking the inner demon was equivalent to attacking him. Chapter 30:11. However, this kind of self-harming method finally stabilized his mood. He sighed slightly and continued to remove his own spiritual energy meridians. 3 days later, the blooming season of the spiritual pond would arrive. At that time, all the lotuses would bloom together, and the purifying air produced by the blooming would reach the peak of the spiritual energy of the lotuses. Therefore, he had to remove his own Buddhist bones first before he could release her from the pagoda on that day, and then refine the magic tool. Wei Wei Bai felt strange. After 3 full days, Ning Chen, the little bald donkey from the perpetual motion school, did not come. Could it be that he was bored, so he entered the sage state? Or was he tortured to death by his inner demon? The system also went out to take a look, but it did not see where the male lead was. However, it saw that the lotuses in the spiritual pond had all grown buds. For the first time, the two of them were looking forward to the arrival of the target. If he did not come, the time for the mission was almost over. This was the bad thing about being locked up. When it was time for the mission, if the target did not come, it would be a waste of time. Just as Wei Wei Bai and the system were discussing whether to spend a lot of money to buy a lock-opening tool to sneak out to find the person, the door of the pagoda suddenly opened. Wei Wei Bai almost jumped up from the chair, and then leaned on the chain wall, looking at him through the gap. Ning Chen saw the girl leaning on the chain wall, her beautiful eyes full of pitiful expectation. She pursed her lips, and the corners of her eyes turned red. He paused his steps, then walked over as if nothing had happened, and reached out to open the chain. She did not retreat for a moment, and her whole body fell forward. He reached out to grab it. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to hug him, and just as she was about to ask the system to take out the sticker, she found that her hands and feet had become smaller, and once again hung on Monk Ning's collar. Ning Chen reached out and let her stand on his palm. The little Wei Wei Bai looked at him with a puzzled face. Ning Chen looked at her quietly for a moment, and then said indifferently, "Come out with me for a while." Then he carefully held her and walked out. The sun was shining outside, and the sky was blue. Not far from the blue sky, there was a conspicuous dark cloud, and the thunder dragon was faintly discernible within. Seemingly sensing that the person whom it wanted to kill had appeared, the head of the lightning dragon immediately popped out and scanned its surroundings. Wei Wei Bai immediately shrank back. Ning Chen stretched out his sleeve and covered her. His voice was calm. "If you are so scared, why did you do such a great evil in the first place?" Wei Wei Bai really couldn't argue with the monk about this. After all, Sky Law was indeed targeting her, and she couldn't refute it even if she had 10,000 mouths. Moreover, she was busy reading the instructions for the new stickers that she had obtained. Ning Chen brought her back to the spirit pool. He stood on the calm water and placed her on a lotus flower. The lotus flowers in the spiritual pond had bloomed. In the dense spiritual energy of the water vapor, it was exceptionally beautiful. Wei Wei Bai sat on the lotus bud and looked at Monk Ning blankly. "Monk, why did you bring me here?" Ning Chen stood in front of her. His slender figure stood on the surface of the water as the prayer beads floated in the air. A trace of gentleness finally appeared on his cold and calm face. "In the future, you will be alone. Don't do evil anymore, and don't seduce others." He placed more emphasis on the last few words. Wei Wei Bai had already studied the use of the sticker. She needed to touch Ning Chen to make it work. She stretched out her hand and was about to climb onto Ning Chen's body again, but found that she was trapped in the lotus flower. Her fingers couldn't reach out, and all her fingertips touched was a film-like enchantment. T. Chapter 30:12. Ning Chen has slowly squatted down. The young man with cold eyes and beautiful eyelashes gently droop. His voice softens. "I'll pick out the Buddha bone and give it to you. Then you can leave the tower and don't have to be locked up anymore." Wei Wei Bai is stunned at first, as if she doesn't know what the Buddha bone is. Then she comes to her senses and jumps up, reaching out to hit the thin barrier. "Wait, monk, what do you mean? Who wants your Buddha bone? Are you out of your mind? Let me out." The little lotus spirit jumps up and down in the barrier, but she can't get out no matter what. Ning Chen's face is indifferent. His finger gently slides in the air, and the reiki of the pool turns into a blade at his fingertip. He looks at the blade. "I've removed all the reiki meridians, leaving only the beer. This is the source of all the reiki. If it is not broken, the reiki meridians will still grow. And the Buddha bone can't be taken out." Ning Chen sees the little girl's face is red with anger, and she is violently struggling in the barrier. His heart softens and he can't help but smile. "In the future, you can be free." Wei Wei Bai's eyes are red. She looks at him blankly for a while, and suddenly tears flow down. "Monk, if you leave like this, what will happen to your baby in my belly?" Ning Chen's finger stops rubbing the blade, and then he seriously looks up. "No, we are different. Moreover, you are a plant. You can't have a child with a human." Wei Wei Bai purses her lips, and her eyes are full of tears. She cries miserably, "Then if I don't have a child, don't you plan to marry me?" Ning Chen is silent for a while, as if he has never thought about this problem. Wei Wei Bai is crying while digging the thin barrier. Bold monk Ning is really a money burner. She spends another 10 days of life points to buy a small hammer. He bought a small enchantment hammer. Although it was small and concealed, it was a waste of time. She is delaying while digging the barrier. You ruined my reputation, and then you leave. What will happen to me if you die? You want my body, and then you don't care about me anymore. Ning Chen felt that these words sounded a little fierce. He moved his lips and finally sighed helplessly. My inner demons are getting bigger and bigger. Moreover, when my heart is moved, it is equivalent to a crack in my heart. In addition to the characteristics of the Buddha bone, if I continue to live, I will be tortured in the heart demon hell for the rest of my life. If it was just torture, it would be fine. What he was afraid of was that his temperament was unstable. What if one day he didn't pay attention? Then, he would be controlled by his inner demons. When the time came, he would bring disaster to the world or hurt her. It was not something he could bear. After he left behind the best things for her to protect herself. This was the price he had to pay for coveting her. Ning Chen rubbed the tip of the knife and made sure that it was sharp enough. Just as he was about to aim the knife at the spot between his eyebrows expressionlessly, however, he found a hand grabbing his wrist tightly. He stopped his actions. Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled, but then he saw that Wei Wei Bai had become bigger. She broke through his enchantment and knelt in front of him with an angry face. The girl's fingers were so cold, and her voice was almost trembling. Monk, who wants your self-sacrifice? How can you abandon me to fulfill your wish? Ning Chen stared at her in a daze and saw that there were wounds beginning to appear on her face. They were wounds from breaking through the enchantment. She was too fast, and the wounds had just appeared. A trace of grief appeared in his dark and deep eyes. However, his tone was still indifferent. Don't worry about this. After I die, you will know that I am just an insignificant light in your long life in a few years. Soon, I will be extinguished. Fast. Chapter 30:13. Bai Weiwei gripped his wrist tightly, refusing to let the knife in his hand point between her eyebrows. A tragic smile appeared on her fair and beautiful face. You're happy after death. How do you know that you're not the only light in my life? If I lose you, I won't have any light in my long life. Are you so confident that there will be another man who will love me like you do? Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while before smiling slightly. You will. Maybe if you wait long enough, you'll meet me after reincarnation. He didn't know why, but he had this kind of confidence. It was as if he would love the same person for a lifetime of reincarnation. He wouldn't change this love because she was good or evil, ugly or beautiful, weak or strong. Wei Wei Bai's fingers almost dug into his skin. As she cried, she said coldly, "Idiot, I said that I would purify you. I won't go back on my words. You're a coward who would die for a little demon." Ning Chen was so calm that it could even be said that he was indulging her. Seeing that her eyes were red from crying, his heart finally ached. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her eyes, kissing her down along with her tears. It was like comforting, but it was more like saying goodbye. Sky Law was approaching. He wanted to protect her and protect her from being attacked by Sky Law. Compared to the inner demon, this was more important. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 98. Wei Wei Bai heard the favorability prompt and also saw the thunder dragon of Sky Law above the spiritual pool, ready to move. She knew that Sky Law wouldn't descend. Because Ning Chen was here. But it could make Monk Ning make up his mind to remove his Buddha bone faster. She didn't expect that Monk Ning would take this path. Although she knew that with his personality, even if he became evil and the inner demon increased. He wouldn't become a real evil person. But she didn't expect that he was actually a saint. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her finger, and a sticker that only she could see appeared on her fingertip. The ability of this sticker could absorb any desire, darkness, filth, and impurities. Then, it would be sucked into the bottomless pit of darkness and completely destroyed. She bought this toy not only to increase her favorability, but also because she thought that Monk Ning was not a bad person after all. She ate his food, drank his wine, took his mirror, and flirted with him. This could be considered as returning a little something to him. She was such a noble, kind, and beautiful person. Wei Wei Bai could feel Ning Chen's kiss leaving him. His low voice rang out, "My desire and darkness have intertwined to form a hell. No one can dispel it nor purify it." Ning Chen's words came to a halt as his calm eyes trembled. However, Wei Wei Bai was very calm. She reached out her hand and touched the cinnabar between his eyebrows, revealing a smile. "Who said I can't purify it? I have killed 100 evil men. I can absorb and purify the instant the darkness appeared. You are the only one who can refine it into a magic artifact. Can't I?" Ning Chen saw the flower bud in her hair begin to bloom. It bloomed beautifully and beautifully. But it was close to Tumi's decadence. Ning Chen's calm expression finally showed a trace of fear. "Stop. What are you doing?" She was still young. It was impossible for the flower bud on her head to bloom immediately, unless her strength was exhausted. Wei Wei Bai saw that it was almost time. She sighed slightly. The sticker on her fingertips had already connected with the monk. And the darkness of his inner demon began to disappear on her fingers. And her body was slowly turning into a lotus. The system said that when the attack time was up, the power to maintain her human form would disappear. And the sticker was stuck to the lotus. As long as Ning Chen held the lotus, he would be purified. The lotus would not wither because it had obtained the #1 beauty in the world sticker. It looked like a super powerful purifying magic artifact. Wei Wei Bai's body slowly lost its strength. She lowered her head softly and leaned on him. "Monk, I will become a purifying magic artifact and stay by your side, okay?" Although she was asking, she had already turned herself into the medium of the sticker, which was the lotus magic artifact in the eyes of outsiders. Her fingers gently rested on his shoulder, but she couldn't lift them. Because she had become a lotus leaf. Her words became softer and softer, like the sound of the wind blowing. Ning Chen reached out to grab it, but found that he was holding a lotus. And the little lotus was still whispering these words. She whispered, "In the future, you don't have to worry about your inner demon anymore. I will dissolve it for you. You don't have to worry about desires. I will absorb them for you. You are in hell, I will turn hell into a sea of flowers." Ning Chen's fingers were holding her leaf. He felt the dark aura of the Buddha bone, constantly flowing away. He moved his lips and found that something was flowing down from the corner of his eyes. Her words were too soft. He still heard it. "You don't have to suffer." Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 100, /full text txt download /, Chapter 30:14. Wei Wei Bai found that she had turned into a lotus. Fortunately, it was still the lotus with the world's #1 beauty sticker. She was still so beautiful that all the other lotuses had to lower their heads in shame. But she couldn't move. Wei Wei Bai, who was lying obediently in the lotus, was speechless. The system was updating the database. "Wait for me. I need to change the parameters before you can leave." Although the mission time was up, it was against the rules to stay in this world. But this time, the system didn't update the data in time, resulting in a time difference. Plus, the main and side missions were completed perfectly. Staying for a few days wouldn't be punished. The only consequence was that the host's soul couldn't move and could only stay in the place where she died. When she died, she was in the lotus, so she was now a beautiful lotus. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up. She couldn't move her body, only her eyes. But she found that she was placed on a plate. Above the plate was a huge Buddha statue. She looked up with effort and saw that she was lying on the altar. Didn't she become a purifying artifact? Monk Ning didn't take her with him. What happened to treating her like Xiao Tian Tian? She had only died for a few days, but he threw her to the Buddha statue and let her gather dust as an offering. People turn into flowers after they die. He changed his mind when he couldn't touch her. If he didn't solve his inner demon, which little demon would he like? No, he went to read scriptures. Monk Ning loved to read scriptures the most. The system immediately looked around and found that the male lead really wasn't there. But since the mission was completed, there should be no need to worry about the male lead running around. He was a masochist anyway. After the mission was completed, he could go anywhere. Wei Wei Bai felt that Monk Ning changed his mind too quickly, but she wasn't worried. She couldn't move, so she could only follow the system to repair the game console. She watched the system repair the wires. Although she couldn't see where the system was, she could see the wires. She was so bored that she looked at the wires to pass the time. After looking at the wires, she poked her head out of the lotus and looked around. Although she couldn't leave the lotus, her soul could still attach to the lotus and look around. The place where the Buddha statue was placed was frighteningly empty. Countless Buddha statues of various shapes and sizes were placed on both sides of the hall. And the table she was sitting on just happened to be facing the largest Buddha statue. The Buddha statue was unusually compassionate, but it was cold and distant as it looked down at her. She didn't feel anything when she stayed in this place, but she did feel a chill. He stayed for about 2 days. The system had finally fixed the game console, but it would take some time for the database to be automatically updated. Therefore, she and the system were once again reduced to gaming nerds. She had no choice but to stay at home. She really couldn't go anywhere now. Wei Wei Bai was engrossed in playing games with the system. The system suddenly reminded her, Hey, the male lead is here. Wei Wei Bai snorted. So what if he's here? He's definitely here to recite the scriptures. He loves reciting the scriptures the most. I'm second in line. The most beautiful woman in the world was always around him. In the end, if it wasn't for the fact that she sacrificed herself and moved him, he reckoned that it would take forever for her to gather 100 favorable impression points. When he saw her face, he couldn't help but give her a favorable impression of him. This was an insult to the title of number 1 in the world. Saying that Monk Ning was a tortoise was already praising him. He was more like a tortoise basking in the sun. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about Monk Ning at all. It wasn't easy for her to clear the level, so she didn't want other miscellaneous matters to appear. // For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 30:15. However, at the last second of clearing the level, she was suddenly picked up by someone. Then, she failed the level and her game character died. Wei Wei Bai looked up coldly and saw the young man standing by the table, his fair fingers gently pinching the crystal green flower stem. His features were cold, and his face was ghastly pale like a ghost. The white monk robe on his body looked a little loose. He felt as if his entire body had melted under the scattered sunlight, colorless. The redness on his thin lips had also disappeared. His bloodless lips were dry and thin like a piece of white paper. the only color left on his body. However, there was a beautiful cinnabar between his eyebrows that had no warmth. Wei Wei Bai was held in his hand. She saw his slightly thin jawline, thin and shallow lips, and those drooping eyelashes that covered half of his eyes that were cold and dead. He reached out his fair fingertips and gently touched her petals. Still no reaction. He muttered softly without any emotional fluctuation. His hoarse voice was terrifyingly calm. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes. Reaction. Ning Chen glanced at the 10,000 Buddha hall and sighed faintly. Then, he carefully pulled her into his arms and covered her with his wide sleeves. He didn't want her to be exposed to the sunlight. Then, the young man walked out slowly and steadily. The shadow under his feet had become very faint. However, he could still see the color of his inner demon. The inner demon hell had been absorbed by her. He only had Buddha's heart and bones in his heart. This was the first time he didn't see this dark world since the inner demon hell appeared. He didn't need to fight with so many dark desires anymore. His world suddenly quieted down. The good and the bad were all silent. It was too quiet. Ning Chen walked out slowly. All the monks surrounded the main hall. The leading old monk held a bunch of lotus leaves and stood far away. They all looked as if they had lost their parents. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Martial uncle, you have already taken a step forward. The inner demon hell has also quietened down. If you continue to cultivate, it will be good news for Buddhism. The old monk lowered his head and said respectfully. Everyone knew about Ning Chen's strange behavior during this time. Everyone was hoping that he could defeat the demonic will and continue to be the leader of the Thousand Origin Temple. After all, the reason why Buddhism and Taoism had been so strong in the past 10 years was because of Ning Chen, who had a Buddhist heart and a Buddhist bone. Finally, Ning Chen looked like he had returned to normal. Furthermore, his various abilities had also been enhanced, so of course everyone was happy. However, they didn't expect that Ning Chen would make such a decision, which made all of them feel disbelief. Ning Chen only glanced at them indifferently. Then, he continued to walk forward with his lotus in his arms. All the monks surrounded him but did not dare to stop him. They could only follow him. When they finally saw the gate. Finally, Ning Chen glanced sideways and stared at them coldly. Today is the day I return to the secular world. Just send it here. Outside the temple, the cold wind blew against the green bamboos. A white-robed youth stood in the wind, his features cold and exquisite. The old monk hugged the lotus and his face was full of tears. Senior uncle, why did you return to the secular world? There has to be a reason. There is no reason. This is your home. He grew up here. Everyone thought that he would stay. However, they didn't expect that he would suddenly leave. Without Ning Chen, who could defend Buddhism? They were so strong and united now because of his existence. Ning Chen was indifferent. He walked down the stairs step by step. //T. Chapter 30:16. When he was halfway there, he slowly turned his head and looked at the temple. His eyes were still calm and empty. Then, everyone finally heard his exceedingly calm voice. I've returned to secular life and married a wife. This was the last time the monks of the temple saw their abbot. Wei Wei Bai stayed in the lotus and poked her head out. She saw Monk Ning carrying her and walking forward. The Dharma robe turned into a flying blanket. He brought her to the Taoists. The Taoists came out to welcome them and brought a soul-searching lamp. The system immediately blocked the host's soul. As expected, the lamp couldn't detect soul fluctuations. The light in Ning Chen's eyes slowly dimmed as the lamp was extinguished. The Taoists had no choice. He brought her to a distant corner to look for some big shots who cultivated alone. Everyone was very willing to help him. But all kinds of things couldn't turn his lotus into a human form. In fact, they couldn't find the aura of a soul. In a few days, Ningchen found a bunch of people, but they couldn't get any reaction from her. Wei Wei Bai wasn't bored anymore. Although she couldn't move, she looked at so many scenery and so many people. It was also a kind of fun. Moreover, the system said that she could leave this plane in another day. Wei Wei Bai was even less anxious. Moreover, Ning Chen still looked very calm. Other than being a little thinner and having his hair a little longer, there were no other changes. It seemed that this monk wasn't the kind of person who would die for a woman. Wei Wei Bai was gratified. She had seen what happened in the plane after death a few times. Wei Wei Bai began to decrease the effect of 100 favorability. Perhaps 100 favorability was just the data produced by an ordinary person's love. Losing her. It wouldn't cause irreparable damage to his life. For example, suicide or something. Moreover, he wanted to marry a wife after returning to secular life. He probably felt that he had to find a woman to live with. He was really quick to recover from a blow. This wasn't bad. Wei Wei Bai thought calmly. She glanced at Monk Ning and found that he had walked to another mountain peak. There was a straw house here. Although it was small, it had all the essentials. It was enough for daily necessities. He scooped some water in a ladle and carefully washed the petals for her. It was as carefully as if he was washing her face. Wei Wei Bai couldn't move, otherwise she would splash water on his face. She had the number 1 beauty on her body and a bottomless hole to absorb darkness sticker. She didn't have any dirt on her body and even had a super beautifying effect. There was no need to wash her face. After Ning Chen washed her petals, he entered the house. Bai Weiwei yawned, feeling that her soul was beginning to tire. She saw Monk Ning cutting the red cloth with a pair of scissors. Why was he cutting this? The system also Lu. You can leave now. Bai Weiwei glanced at Monk Ning and found that he was still silently cutting the red cloth. He seemed to be fine. So she said to the system, then let's go. When Monk Ning left her, he still had a calm expression on his face. His life didn't change at all. Perhaps it was the effect of her lotus purification. His heart was calmer, and he was more at peace. Wei Wei Bai slowly closed her eyes as she analyzed. The system bent down and slowly carried her soul out. It took a lot of effort to hold it in its arms. The little system wore a child's clothes and walked step by step towards the open passage. Ning Chen had also finished cutting the red cloth. He reached out and tied the red cloth to the lotus. This is your wedding dress, he said softly. The system stopped in its tracks and turned around to look. It saw Ning Chen reveal a gentle smile. His fingers gently touched her lotus petals. The young man's voice was still calm and gentle. I returned to the secular world and came to marry you. It started to rain outside. The young man's voice was faint. I just returned to the secular world. I didn't bring my belongings out of the temple. Everything has to start from scratch. Maybe you will have to suffer for a while, he said as he tidied up the scissors on the table. But I won't let you suffer. After tidying up, the young man quietly lowered his eyes. Then he stretched out his fingertips and gently stroked the petals. If you want anything, remember to tell me. At this point, the smile on his face finally disappeared. In the dripping sound of the rain, the young man sat quietly. Under his fingertips was the beautiful lotus. He was lonely like a ghost. He was not human at all. The system held the soul ball and calmly turned around. Then, it walked back without any hesitation. Slash. Chapter 30:17. The closer they were to the door of reality, the more vigilant the system became. Yi Yuxuan, who had turned into a monk, was as slow as old rock. He probably couldn't break free from his body and chase after them. So he had to face the neurotic Yi Yuxuan again. He reached out his small hand and hugged the white and soft soul ball, paying attention to the red line that extended out from the ball. The red translucent thread was long and sturdy, and it extended forward. Entering the darkness, they couldn't see the door of reality clearly. But seeing that the red line was loose, no one would think it was pulling. The system heaved a sigh of relief. That guy was probably sleeping again and didn't notice their arrival. Just as the system thought so, it saw the door of reality. It saw the border of the land of bones, almost to the side of the door. Just a little more and it would squeeze through the door. How could this be? Such a pile of bones. Were they taking out the trash? Did they have any manners? The system curled its lips and mocked the low quality of divinity. Then, just as it was about to take a step, its whole body stiffened. Because it saw a throne of bones, placed so casually at the edge of the land of bones. The throne that had always been placed on the peak of the mountain of bones, looking down on all the bones from above. So casually, so unpretentious, casually placed on the side of the road. And that cold, dead, inhuman, super dead-faced divinity Yi Yuxuan was so calm, sitting on the chair, staring at him with a calm expression. The system, if it was on the mountain peak before, it was a god looking down coldly at the lower realm. But now it was a roadside stall, a sick young man sitting casually with a plastic sword at his feet, like a dog blocking the door. This was an illusion. Of course, it was only for a moment. The person sitting on the throne of bones still didn't move. His eyes were half covered under his eyelashes, and the golden halo was still dead and desolate. His beautiful fingers were casually placed on the armrest, a golden ring was hanging from his index finger, and a host's doll was hanging shakily below it. The beautiful man seemed to have fallen asleep by the side of the road. There was no reaction. The system hugged the soul ball, not knowing whether to go or not. This was deliberately making things difficult for him. This was because Hong Xian couldn't drag the host over, so she waited at the entrance all day long to stop them. Mother, what was the difference between this and a loafer who chased after girls? If he couldn't catch up, he could only block, wait at the entrance of the other party's house. Seeing that he was still asleep, the system immediately held Tuanzi carefully. Then, it tiptoed and slowly walked forward step by step. He walked to the edge of the line and was only one step away from crossing it. The system immediately retracted its foot, afraid that it would step into the land of bones. He saw that the man was still sitting there quietly, as if he was really sleeping. The system sighed and was about to step out when a piece of white bone fell from the border. It rolled to his feet. The system almost tripped over itself. He immediately held his breath, and the bone finally rolled to another place without making any other sound. The system heaved a sigh of relief, then carried Wei Tuanzi with its short arms and was about to walk forward. However, he found that something was wrong. Whose hand was that above his soul? His hands were on both sides of his body. The system's body stiffened, and when it looked up, it found that the sleeping loafer was still sitting on the chair. Slash. Chapter 30:18. In the background of endless white bones, the cold man bent down slightly, his fingers landing lightly on the soul. His eyes were filled with endless loneliness and calmness, like a fossil from ancient times, frozen in time. Following his movements, the solidification of the dried fossils gradually began to soften. The man's beautiful fingertips lightly touched the exterior of the soul. Little by little, inch by inch, he touched it so gently. It was like touching a delicate piece of tofu. He couldn't bear to break it. The system didn't dare to move. It was afraid that this big boss would poke his finger into the soul ball and damage its host's soul. Thus, a strange scene appeared in the soul passage. On one side was a land of weathered bones, and on the other side was endless darkness. There was only a crack of light in front, that was the door to reality. The little system hugged the soul ball, not daring to move. Just like that, the king from the land of bones reached out and stroked the ball. Was this stroking a cat? No, stroking a soul. The system roared in its heart, "Are you done? Hugging for so long without daring to move, you'll get tired too. Did you purposely wait here to touch the host's soul? Do you have any ambition?" The man was expressionless, his eyes were still cold to the point of emptiness, only the strength of his fingers was unbelievably gentle. Finally, he seemed to have realized something, raised his eyelashes slightly, and looked at the end of the soul passage. In the endless darkness, something was slowly returning. Only then did he slowly and reluctantly withdraw his fingers. Then he continued to sit, his long eyelashes drooping, his eyes cold and silent. At first, the system didn't dare to move. It was stiff for a few minutes before it finally lifted its feet and walked step by step towards the door. The light of reality was approaching inch by inch. At the last few steps, the system finally dared to run faster, and immediately rushed into reality. Then it stuffed the host's soul back into the body. It was afraid that the big boss behind it would go back on his words and do something irreversible. The system had just put down the soul, and before it could catch its breath, it saw Yi Yuxuan, who was hugging the host's body, calmly open his eyes. The system immediately widened its eyes. It couldn't be divinity again, right? The last time he used all his strength to seal Yi Yuxuan's body, it was to prevent the power of divinity from returning to her body. Could it be that it had no effect at all? If he were to seal it again, he would probably regress to the infant stage. At that time, the host would have to carry him and run away. He couldn't possibly bring the host's soul along with him. In the end, he was met with a pair of cold and dark eyes. It was okay if it was dark, but it was Yi Yuxuan with human nature. Just as the system heaved a sigh of relief, it realized that Yi Yuxuan was looking at it indifferently. Only then did the system realize that this big boss could see it too. The system smiled awkwardly. "Hello, you're awake." Yi Yuxuan, on the other hand, looked calm. She reached out and pulled the blanket over Wei Wei Bai. It was just an arm, so there was no need to be so vigilant. Furthermore, he still looked like a child. Yi Yuxuan sees that she is still asleep and knows that the soul will not wake up immediately after entering the body for a period of time. He then got up expressionlessly, walked to the living room, and found a pen and paper. The system was at a loss. "Big boss, what's wrong with you? Did you hit your brain when you transmigrated?" The system peeked out and saw Yi Yuxuan sitting on the sofa with his back to the light. His face was cold. He was holding a pen and writing. Line by line, it was written in ancient Chinese. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com//comma. Chapter 30:19. The system looked at it seriously. Scriptures. Yi Yuxuan was serious, and his eyes were still empty. The sound of cold snow whistling, green bamboo swaying, and flowers blooming seemed to come to his ears. But there was no sound of her. As he wrote, he fulfilled his obsession with her in that world. Then, he got rid of all his habits, pains, and excessive paranoia in that world bit by bit. In that world. After he married her. He took her all over the world. He became famous since he was young, and he intimidated demons when he was young. He revitalized Buddhism. He defended Taoism. He had done all the itinerant cultivators great and small favors. After returning to secular life, with this face and his excessive strength, he borrowed or got all kinds of the best tools. But none of them could make her return to her human nature. He even returned to the temple to look for the old turtle's prophecy. But the old turtle said, her past life and present life are all white. No one can see it. This is a strange phenomenon. Maybe I'm not capable enough. He asked why she had become like this. The old turtle looked at him for a long time and finally sighed. Don't deceive yourself. This is not your character. The last heart you have is the heart she has. He used the Buddha bone to refine a magic artifact. He could still preserve his soul and reincarnate. Wasn't it because he could still meet her in his reincarnation? But that little lotus spirit didn't have a substitute like the Buddha bone. And he could refine himself into a magic artifact that could purify a hell. He could only use his soul. And it was a soul with superior purification ability. That was why there was such an effect. Thinking of this, the old turtle sighed. I misunderstood that little girl. You are infatuated, but she is even more infatuated. Who isn't stupid? You got this infatuation for nothing. He stood by the old turtle's pool for a long time before slowly walking away with the lotus in his arms. When he walked to the long bridge, he saw that the lotus was still in full bloom. But none of them could compare to the flower in his arms. He seemed to be able to see the little girl standing on the lotus with a smug look on her face. Monk, am I beautiful? Ning Chen stared blankly at the lotuses in the spirit pool. Finally, he lowered his eyes and tugged at the corner of his lips, revealing a bitter smile. Beautiful. He said softly. I've never seen it before, there is nothing more beautiful than you. She did everything she could to protect his Buddhist heart, but he was still haunted by his inner demons. Although it was not a hell. Because every time he hugged her, she would absorb the dark aura from his body. Later on, he couldn't bear to hug her for fear of hurting her. But he felt extremely sad when he couldn't hug her. Sometimes he would put her in the water, afraid that she would wither without water. Sometimes, he would look at her from afar, wanting to leave her in the land of purity and then leave. Then she would not be able to absorb the darkness from him. Later on, he realized that he wasn't that magnanimous and willing. She was his. He would not put her in a place that he could not see or touch. Or even, to anyone. Later on, he found a method in the Buddhist scriptures of the temple. It was said to be a sincere prayer, and he had to write down 10,000 reincarnation scriptures. He could summon her remnant soul. He was already starting to age, and he didn't have much time left. The materials used for the scriptures, the pen, the paper, and the ink were all not ordinary materials. He used all kinds of methods to obtain these materials. He began to accompany her, writing the scriptures seriously and piously in the old forest. One by one, each word consumed his essence chi/T. Chapter 30-20. Autumn came, and the leaves fell. It fell on the scripture. He slowly reached out and brushed it away. Winter came, and the heavy snow pressed down on the roof. He was afraid that it would be too cold and she couldn't stand it, so he sewed a warm cloth bag for her overnight. Then he held her in his arms and began to write the scripture. Snowflakes fell on the scripture, and he blew on them. Spring came back to life, and flowers bloomed. Birds flew in to peck at his scripture materials. He used a barrier to separate them. The pages of the soul-returning scripture were just pieces of longing. 10,000 pieces. Summer seemed to have come. He leaned on the table and looked out of the window with half-closed eyes. The pen in his hand was still tightly gripped. This was the last piece. He still needed the last piece. Suddenly, he heard something slowly climbing up the window. It was her delicate sigh. "Monk, the window is so high. I'm tired of climbing." He slowly looked up and saw the summer light shining in. The little lotus spirit sat on the window. She held her cheeks with both hands and smiled. "Monk, you still like scriptures the most. You're still writing." He couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile. "No, I'm writing about you. A lifetime of 4 seasons, every sentence is about you." Click. The pen in his fingers finally fell. Then he closed his eyes. He didn't finish writing the scripture. Only the last piece was left. Yi Yuxuan also slowly wrote the last word. He stared blankly at the last line of scripture. The complicated scripture, the strange yet familiar handwriting. It wasn't him, but it was also his. Yi Yuxuan finally exhaled lightly. Then he put down the pen, picked up the paper, and walked to the kitchen to burn it. Then he poured 2 cups of ice water to suppress the boiling emotions from the previous world. Then he slowly walked out. When he walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps and posture finally returned to normal. It was no longer the monk's posture. Then he returned to the room and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting up, rubbing her eyes and muttering something about the system. When she saw him, she was immediately stunned. Then her eyes became clear again. Yi Yuxuan nonchalantly walked over and gave her a set of clothes. He reached out to touch her hair, but realized that his hand gesture still carried the rhythm of that world. He immediately changed his posture and patted her head with his finger. "You're awake. Get up and eat some porridge." Wei Wei Bai reached out and rubbed her head. She was still in a daze. After all, she was a little dazed after sleeping for so long. Then, she finally remembered the last time she left. Yes, he saw Yi Yuxuan's calm expression. Wei Wei Bai also looked calm. When he went to make a call to get someone to deliver fresh vegetables, Wei Wei Bai also ran to wash up and change her clothes. Then, she stepped on her plush slippers and walked out calmly. Everyone was doing that. This was the typical state of cohabitation. It was no longer a pure relationship between a man and a woman. The system was munching on high-energy chocolate to replenish its body fat when it heard the host mumbling to himself. It couldn't help but say, "When have you ever been pure?" There was no need to talk about his body. His mind was a complete mess. He didn't misunderstand the two of them, right? Every time they were together, he would be blocked out many times, and he was not sure. Wei Wei Bai touched her face. "Sigh, it's my own fault for being impure. To prevent similar things from happening again, I should move out first." Then, she turned and walked towards the kitchen. However, she saw Yi Yuxuan's calm expression. He was wearing an apron with his sleeves rolled up. He was holding a kitchen knife as he was preparing a fish. He turned and looked at her calmly. Then, he said gently, "You're hungry. Eat some porridge first. The food will be ready soon." Wei Wei Bai blinked and looked at him again. Then, she nodded blankly and went out again. After she went out, she leaned against the wall. "No, I don't have any other thoughts when I see him." /save button at the bottom to record this reading. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.